And it would fund these different cells to do very specific acts, whether it's surveillance or sniper operations or IEDs or being used to purchase IED material. Hundreds of hours of interrogations to get there. And he finally opened it up, and we had this huge cornucopia of information flowing from him, and it just connected the dots to like a gazillion different things going on in Europe, Horn of Africa, all over the Middle East. It was like a big Pandora's box. He was staring at my pen, his foot's shaking really bad. He's just like, gritting. I'm like, why are you staring at my pen so intently? And he's like, I'm trying to decide if I'm going to grab this pen and stab you to death with it. And I was like, really? Well, let me make it easy for you. So I picked up the pen, I put it right in front of him. I said, you're free to try anytime you want, but in the meantime, you're answering my question. I was just trying to challenge him. I wanted to basically let him know that you're not in charge. You have no power here. I have absolute authority and power over you, and we just hoodwinked you.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served war zone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we hear the combat story of James Rosone, best known as a best-selling author, but who also interrogated terrorists in Iraq on the front lines before picking up the pen. James was inside the booth, conducting tactical interrogations downrange and feeding intel on dangerous routes, IED makers, and high-value targets to coalition forces up to Tier 1 on a daily basis. Like so many vets, he dealt with a deep regret of feeling like he didn't do enough and, for years, accepting the blame when an American lost an arm breaching a target that he had developed, or worse, losing a life on the objective. After leaving the service, James found his calling as an author, in part as a way to handle his PTSD. We talk about his experience with psychedelics and other treatment options he used to keep his demons at bay. He's gone on to write 26 books, ranging from a memoir titled Interview with a Terrorist to his well-known military and espionage thrillers like the Monroe Doctrine. He's now sharing his writing experience with other vets to help them become successful authors on their own. I hope you enjoy this deep dive into the world of an interrogator at the height of the surge to becoming a wildly successful author as much as I did. James, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time to share your story with us.
Thank you for having me on, and I'm excited to share what I know with you guys as well.
I'm really excited to dig in on the interrogation side of your background, but I can't start off there. I really want to just spend a second on the fact that you're a full-time author. And I wonder, because as someone who has not written a book before, but as you were growing up, would it have surprised you to think one day you were going to be an author, or was it more likely, hey, I'm going to be an interrogator one day?
No, I never would have thought growing up I would have been any of those things, especially a writer. I'm absolutely atrocious. Growing up, I was atrocious with spelling and writing. My grammar was just, horrible. I think I probably had some dyslexia growing up, to be honest. And I certainly had ADHD that wasn't being treated or didn't know about. And I was just terrible with that stuff. So no way. Even when I was in college, I had I felt like maybe I might like some of this when I took a creative writing course in college, but generally speaking, no, I never thought I would ever become a writer, let alone do as good as we have.
Yeah. For someone who's not used to that, it seems odd that you would have those difficulties as a kid and then somehow grow into writing the way you have.
Yeah.
Is there some almost intangible trait that successful writers like yourself have that you may have noticed in yourself as a kid, even if it's not the grammar and the desire to write like that?
I think part of it is having an active imagination. So when growing up, one of the things was we always go outside and play, whether you're playing in the woods and building forts and having imaginary battles, and whether they're Westerns or out of army movies or, the Roman times, whatever it is. The point was you have an active, engaged memory and in mind. And I think that really helps when you're trying to create stories, because you have to have a very active imagination to come up with a story, but then say, okay, how does it go from this point to this point, and what's going to happen in between? That whole journey, it's that whole thing with like the Hobbit, right? So we know that Frodo and his friends are going to go on this journey to take this ring and throw it into Mount Mordor and end it, right? and we know at the end that they throw it in there and they do that. But it's the entire piece in the middle that composed those several books and movies that created some spectacular experiences along the way and really drew you in. And that's kind of what writing is. So you have your what you're starting with, and then you have kind of where you think it's going to go, and then you got to figure out how do I get in between part there. And that's where all the fun part happens. And that's where, honestly, the creative memory, just the mind is right there. You got to have that. You know.
Did you grow up like seeking certain movies, shows, books that really entertained you, that had an influence on you?
For me, I really liked anything to do with the Civil War. I was huge into studying that. So a lot of people don't know, believe it or not, I was actually homeschooled growing up. So I was homeschooled back before it was A, known, and B, it was cool and the internet was around. So this was like the 80s, and into the early 90s. So it was a different experience. And because I wasn't around as many quote school kids, we had some homeschool families and things where we would get together in, little co-ops and things like that. But that really forced me to be creative, to be able to entertain myself, so to speak. And books was a really big part of it. So I read a lot of books. I loved history. I'd read everything I could on the Civil War, a lot about World War II, and study that. And my grandparents had fought, my grandpas had fought in World War II. And so I would pick their brains and get stories from them and hear about that. And that to me was just amazing. We knew some people who, they had fought in Vietnam. So I naturally asked them lots of questions about Vietnam. And obviously you saw the movies, if you're a kid of the 80s, you grew up seeing, Apocalypse Now and Platoon and some of these other movies and, Full Metal Jacket, things that came out. So yeah, it spawned your interest. And then you had, Dick Marchenko coming out with his SEAL Team 6, and you had, a bunch of other kind of military guys coming out with books of Vietnam, the wars of Vietnam and different things. So I started reading a lot of that, and it really piqued my interest in the military and in wars in general. And I think I always knew I wanted to join the military. I just wasn't sure necessarily what I wanted to do. I guess I followed the pattern that a lot of other people do, is just going to college, right? My dad went to college. He worked in computer science. He was really good with his job. I saw that he was making pretty good money doing it, and I was like, well, okay, this seems like what I should do. And a really big mentor of mine, Rick Pinter, is my next door neighbor at the time. He was really big into that as well. And he had served in the military. He's actually in the Air Force, worked in computers back in the late 60s, early 70s. And
wow, early.
On his way to go to Vietnam, he got plucked by the CIA, actually. And they said, whoa, you're a little too smart in computers to go that way. So we're going to send you here. And his job was basically just hacking into, at the time, Soviet computer systems. And instead of sending like munitions to this ammo dump or to this forward deployed unit, they'd send them extra toilet paper or something and just kind of go haywire with the logistical systems. That was his job. And it fascinated the heck out of me. So that's piqued my interest in the intel world. It piqued my interest in that. But, he also went to college to kind of get to there. So, I kind of felt I needed to go to college and kind of move that direction.
Well, let me, before we get into the college decisions, you've mentioned the Civil War a couple of times. Like, what was it that interested you there?
So for me, I was fascinated with Robert E. Lee. Was one of my characters I really liked to study, because one, he was just a fascinating character and man. But what he was able to do with a very small, outnumbered, under-equipped force against a far superior force, better equipped, just poorly led, was incredible to me. How someone can take a small ragtag group like that and just continue to outfox a far superior force time and time again, over and over and over. And he did this through one, being an exceptional leader, being able to inspire his people to go above and beyond and do more than what was being asked of them, or more than what they thought they could do. And then the other piece was he just never gave up. He didn't look at the problem and say, this is too insurmountable. This is just too big. We can't do this. He looked at it and says, you know what? We're going to find a way, and we're going to keep finding a way and keep finding a way and keep finding a way. And in his biggest downfall, or his biggest failure, was not heeding General Pickett's warnings about about that final day of Gettysburg, when General Pickett said, blatantly, we can't do this. We can't launch this. If we do this, we're going to devastate our line. We're going to break my division, and it's going to cost us. And at the same point, Jeb Stuart was way off in no man's land, and kind of abandoned them, didn't really help them out with being the eyes and ears like they needed. And this was one of the few times that he didn't listen to the advice or counsel of his subordinates. And he went forward and made an incredibly foolish decision to charge. And that ultimately cost the Confederacy, I think, the war, because it just broke the back of the army. They were no longer undefeated. The losses were just absolutely devastating, and they were irreplaceable losses. And it had no strategic value. It wasn't like some of the other battles that, Second Battle of Antietam, or some of the other major battles where there was a strategic importance or significance. So suffering those casualties had a reason. Gettysburg wasn't accomplishing a stated mission or goal other than to just try and go into, go north. So that was really interesting, I thought.
Yeah. Okay. I love it. And I think this will tie in as we get into your time interrogating folks. If we jump forward into college, obviously you've kind of got this seed of, you got World War II, the Civil War, some of this military background, but maybe not from your immediate parents, but certainly from your grandparents, you've seen this. Yeah. How do you start making the decision on what branch and where you're going to go within the military?
Yeah. So initially, I did my fall semester in fall of '96. I'm to the University of Wisconsin Parkside, which is in Kenosha. That's where I grew up, in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And I'll be honest, it was my first semester in time in a professional school setting, because mind you, I'd been homeschooled.
Yeah,
so I had never really been around that. I hadn't gone to a formal class with a teacher and a bunch of classmates, and being given assignments like in that format, and then having to do these assignments and turn this in and study and take notes. I wasn't used to that. We were much more like free range learning, so to spep, I guess. You just kind of, once you understand how to read, write, and do math, you really can teach yourself an awful lot, especially if you're an avid reader. I had access to a library card, so books were there. But I really struggled that first semester. I was absolutely just doing abysmal with it, and not doing well with it. I knew I wanted to do college, but at the same time, I didn't feel I was smart enough for it. And I think I really lacked the confidence to be able to make college work for me, and be able to do that. So that's when I started looking at the military. I initially, go figure, I went to the Marine recruiter office, and as fate would have it, the buggers were out to lunch. So out came for lunch an Army recruiter, and he says, hey. And so we started talking, and I went and took the ASVAB with them. We started talking some different jobs. My parents knew I was starting to seriously consider this stuff. My uncle at the time was in the Wisconsin Army National Guard. He was an active duty Guard member, so that was his full-time job, was working at one of the armories. And he'd been in for 25 years, so he had a lot of experience with that. And he called me up and talked with me, and he's like, James, I know you're interested in this. I'm not saying you shouldn't go active duty, but maybe you should consider doing the Guard first. It'll get you, it'll let you see what the military is like. Try a job, see if this is something you like. Figure out what you might like to do if you were to go active, and then allow you to get the money to go to college. And maybe you could go and become an officer after you finish college and your time in the Guard. And to me, I thought that sounded really, really reasonable, because at the time I had no confidence. I had no confidence whatsoever. And I was very intimidated by the military and leaving for that kind of training and doing that, especially after my college experience. That was an abysmal failure. So I just was really unsure. And the Guard sounded like, I don't want to say a safe bet, but it sounded like a better deal for me to pursue. And so I did. I went and talked to my recruiter in Kenosha and talked with them about some jobs. It was a self-propelled artillery unit, 155 millimeter Paladin unit that I'd be joining. And my uncle at the time told me, he says, hey, look, you want to join that unit because your battalion commander is 3 houses down from me, and we play, we play poker and fish all the time, and you're brigade command sergeant majors, on the other side of the block, and we all, go together. So he's like, just join, you're totally set. He says, I got you. You're set in this place. I was like, all right, whatever, good old boy connections. It's true in the Guard. It does work that way. And so I joined. I went in as a 31 uniform, which is a signal system support specialist, working on all those SINGAR radios and making sure the comms are all up, and the retrans sites, obviously for forward artillery and things like that. And I got trained as a 13 Fox forward observer as well. They said, you're out alone, so you need to learn how to call artillery fire when you set up these retrans sites. And so I would alternate between the two jobs doing that on annual trainings. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. I did not enjoy winter training in northern Wisconsin at Fort McCoy in January. That was not a pleasant experience to be out in the field in northern Wisconsin in January. -10, lots of snow, super cold. You're in a tent, in a sleeping bag. That was quite rough. Yeah.
And are you doing that up until 9/11? Are you in the Guard until 9/11 hits?
Yeah. Yes, I joined in 96. It was a 6-year term. And I was loving it. I really liked it. And I wasn't going to go active duty. At that time, I kind of had determined mentally I was going to stay in the Guard and be a lifer like my uncle was. And I just ride the ranks, because if you're in the Guard, you get your college degree, you do reasonably well, you're a fairly smart person, you can advance pretty quick inside the Guard. And so that was my aim, that was my plan, that was my strategy. And over the summer of 2001, I got accepted to do a study abroad program in Munich, Germany, where I'd go live over in Munich. And so I did all my training for the fall with the Guard, did that over the summer to make up my duty time, so to speak. And then I went over to Germany on the last day of August, and I was there when 9/11 happened. And it's so ironic because the weekend before 9/11 happened, me and a couple of friends had gone to Paris, and we spent that weekend in Paris. And the day before 9/11, we went on a Normandy trip. And so we went to see the beaches of Normandy and Mount de Hawk and all the other areas around there and the cemeteries, and just walk the beach. And I remember just looking at this saying, my God, the courage these men had to have to get off that boat and run like hell up those slopes while they're being machine gunned. It just had to be amazing. I mean, I couldn't imagine doing that myself. And I had already, I'd been in the Guard for a little while now. I was already made sergeant, and it just amazed me that these men were able to do that, the courage. And on the converse side, to be one of those German soldiers looking at this armada just coming towards you, and all you have is this machine gun, and you're like, my God, I'm running out of bullets here, and they just keep coming. And what was going through their minds that whole time? And then we took the night train back to Munich, got in the morning, went to school. And because 9/11 over there happened, I want to say it was around between 11 and 1-ish in the afternoon, give or take, around there. And we just finished our morning classes. I was coming home. I remember stopping at the library and checking my Yahoo mail at the time. And lo and behold, they're like, oh, small plane had crashed in the World Trade Towers. Like, oh, whatever, it's kind of weird. And went back, and then the people we were staying with were like, oh my God, you got to check this out. America's under attack. And I saw the towers and everything else. And for me, that was the moment I said, all right, I'm gonna go active duty. I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna finish college. I'm almost done, and I'm gonna try and go active duty. And
how far along in college were you, James?
I was basically I was there for 5 years as a second year senior, because I double majored. I decided I was already a poli-sci major, and I needed, I think it was like 9 or 12 more credits to get a second degree in international studies. And I figured, well, why not just an extra year and do that? I really enjoyed it. I did a couple of study abroads through that program. So I really wanted to do that path. And I decided I was going to go active duty. And it was a matter, okay, well, am I going active Army, or am I going to test the waters with a different branch at this point? And that's when I decided I was going to go Air Force. So I applied for the Air Force. I was going to go in as an officer. I got selected in early part of 2003, and I was going to go in as an air battle manager. It was going to be my job, fly around those J-STARS and AWACS planes. You control the battle space and direct combat units to different pockets and areas wherever they're going. And I was getting ready to do that, and then sometime in late 2003, I think it might have been when they did the new new defense bill might have been what caused it, but they had to do that force reduction because the Air Force hadn't pivoted off its force reduction plans from prior to 9/11. And so they had to still cut the officer billets. So if you
Oh, I
weren't a
didn't
pilot or
realize that.
navigator,
In
yeah, I
post
didn't realize it.
9/11, they had a reduction.
Yeah, the reduction was actually
Dang.
going strong until 2005 is when they ended the
Wow.
officer reductions. There were too many officers in the Air Force. What happened? And then when 9/11 happened, instead of the standard normal attrition that would normally take place to open the pipeline for the new people to come in, all these people didn't get out. They extended and stayed in longer. And then it happened a second year. Well, now they ended up being way overstaffed on the officer billets. So they had to cut all the incoming officers. And then that didn't help. That didn't lower it down enough. So then they started cutting all the like first, second lieutenants, first lieutenants, and junior captains started being on the chopping block. Because I remember my first flight leader was on the chopping block. He's like, damn it, he's like, he didn't want to be an officer his whole career. And he's a first lieutenant. He's like, now he might lose his spot. And they were going to, if it happened, he was going to be given three choices: get out, take a demotion to enlisted and become a senior airman, or go Army.
Wow.
So it was kind
I
of
love how going in the Army is one of those options.
I know, right? Well, they did that green, they had the blue to green.
Yeah,
They're really trying to get the Air Force to swap over to the Army and help the Army out. And I was left with a choice. I lost my billet. I was left with a choice. I can either deal with that and either re-up back in the Guard, go active Army, or I could go enlisted in the Air Force, ride out the force restructuring, and then just wait for the officer billets to open back up and then reapply. Because I had 2 degrees, I'd have a good shot at getting in. And I decided to go that route. And I got lucky. I was able to keep my rank, came in as a staff sergeant. I got MacDill Air Force Base. I had no idea where that was. And then they said, oh, you're going to MacDill. And I was like, how did you get that? Where the hell is that? Like, it's in Tampa. I was like, we have an Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida on the beach? You got to be kidding me. And so that's what they sent me. It was great. I loved it. And as soon as about a year later is when the interrogation opportunity came around.
Hold up on because I want to get to that, but that's a pretty significant jump to have been in the Guard for the Army for that long and then say, hey, when I go in here, I'm going to actually go to this totally other branch.
It was an NCO.
Was it a tough decision for you to make, or was it just like, hey, I've seen why would you have made that decision, I guess?
So the whole time I was in college, one of my friends in college, he had been in active Air Force for 4 years, and then he was in the Air National Guard. And so we were friends, for my last 3 years of college, we were pretty good friends, and we would hang out and do a lot of stuff. And he was always telling me about things on active Air Force and with the Air National Guard and how he really liked it. And his plan was to finish college and then go back to the Air Force as an officer. That was his plan. So I think he really planted the bug in my ear about becoming an Air Force officer and making it a career that way, as opposed to the Army. We're not going to lie. Everyone knows the difference between the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, and Navy, and whatnot. The Air Force is a cushier lifestyle, honestly. And if you want to have a family and not be deployed continuously or gone all the time, like on a ship, on the Navy, or on the Marines, when you're on fleet duty, the Air Force was a good option. And I liked that. I also liked the technical jobs and the opportunities that were available. I didn't want to go into being an officer and being an infantryman. It's nothing against the infantry. It's just I was looking at what could I do after I leave leave the military, and I wanted something that had some job translation. And the Air Force, I guess at the time, based on my friends, conversations, kind of led me that direction. That's kind of the path I decided to take.
Got it. Okay, super interesting. So you are a staff sergeant. Mm-hmm. And you say a year later, the interrogation opportunity comes up. So how does that present itself? Is it because you're at CENTCOM, which is kind of the heart of this fight? Like what comes up?
It was interesting, actually. So I was, at the time, my squadron had selected me to go become one of the anti-terrorism training instructors for the squadron. So I was going through a 3-week course to do the AT level 1 and 2 and level 3 courses for that to become an instructor. And it was during that, probably a few months before, or right around when I got selected for that, I had to wait for training to go to it. But when I got selected for it, the Chief Master Sergeant for the Air Force put out an email asking for volunteers. He needed 100 volunteers to go assist the Army to do the interrogation mission in Iraq. after Abu Ghraib, the army was technically losing losing that mission at Abu Ghraib, and it was being handed over to the Air Force, or at least the Air Force was taking primary on it. And the Air Force, this was not a traditional standard job the Air Force does. They have a program called 8 Deltas, which is a linguist debriefer. And traditionally, what an 8 Delta does is they do what's called strategic debriefing. So this is where you have a guy who's typically at an embassy, usually in a foreign country where there are prone to be defectors. And those are the guys who go in and do the strat debriefings. So you have a defector from Russia or China or Korea. You would be the guy who would go in and debrief these guys, obtain as much strategic level or tactical level intelligence as you can, and talk with them and do that. And you mostly are posted at embassies for that position. When this came out, though, the Air Force said, well, we don't actually have an interrogator job, so we're just going to take 8 Delta and expand it. And that's when they put out a call. They needed 100 volunteers. Only 58 of us or 56 of us raised our hand to join.
Is that right?
Did not meet the 100.
Wow.
So only 56 of us said it, and this is why the announcement says we need you to do this, and they write up this cool description. It's like Jack Bauer out of 24. You're like, holy cow! I'm going to be, James Bond spy stuff. So cool. Go do interrogations. You're going to do source operations, building spy networks, and all this cool jazz, right? And then at the very end, they say, and by the way, it's a 556-day deployment. And I think that probably killed a lot of the volunteers.
Wow.
The Air Force typically does at most a 3 or 4 month rotation. They don't do 556-day deployments. And that's what it was, because you were going to go through an immense amount of training with the Army, because we had to go to 6.5 months of training, 4 months of training with the Army, then 2 months of advanced training with the Air Force. And then you deploy embedded with Army units doing the Army mission. Wow. And so only 56 of us volunteered. I think at the end of the day, I think there was only like 48 of us that actually completed through all the training and deployed to do the job. So it was a smaller group.
Did they actually expand or modify that 8 Delta training to accommodate what you guys were about to go do?
Yeah, we if you volunteered for this particular mission, you didn't go down the normal 8 Delta training line, which would have been to go to the strat debrief course and another type of interviewing type course that I think was held by private sector or something. Our course had us going direct pipeline to the 97 Echo course, which is the HUMINT course with the Army at Fort Huachuca. And then, so that's a 4.5 month course. First portion of the course is straight up interrogations, interviewing techniques and the tactics you're allowed to use and not use. And then the last half of it, I think that was probably about 6 weeks in the course, was a piece called source operations. Because typically as a HUMINT collector, you're going to do 1 or 2 missions, either straight interrogations or you use source operations. And that really depends on the type of unit you end up deploying to or getting assigned to, and then what type of mission that unit is ultimately tasked with, whether it's developing sources inside a village or a province or a city, or if you're part of a human exploitation team doing those kinds of works, or you're going to be doing detention operations where you're going to be straight up interrogations and doing that line of the job. So there are 2 different tracks. You're trained to do both. And then being Air Force, naturally, the Air Force wants to put its own print on it. So they sent us to this enhanced interrogation and analysis training, which is a very advanced course that typically the E7, E8s and your warrant officers would attend. So it's much more in-depth type of course. And that's honestly the course I think we learned the most at. We did a whole lot of role playing in that course with instructors who were mostly like former SF interrogators, different agency interrogators, other interrogators who had just gotten back from theater. So they had fresh experience, whether it was from Afghanistan, Iraq, or Gitmo. And so they were able to provide you realistic scenarios and what it's going to be like when you encounter these guys, and how do you develop questioning techniques without them necessarily realizing what it is you're actually after. Because there's one way to interrogate someone, say, tell me about X, Y, and Z. And that blatantly says I'm after X, Y, and Z, versus talking with them through a conversation and normal standard chit chat that just happens to reveal X, Y, and Z without them realizing it. That's the trick. And that is the skill that is very hard to master and learn and become very, very good at.
And I have to assume that you don't speak one of these other languages fluently, and you're going to be working through an interpreter.
Correct. We didn't have time to go through through DLI to become Arab linguist. On a normal 97 Echo track, if you join the Army, you're going to go to DLI first, then you're going to go to 97 Echo school. I think it's 25 Mike school or something like that. They recently changed the MOSs, but that's what you would go through, is that kind of a course program. Another unique thing happened though in 2005. Senator Russ Feingold and John McCain, God bless their hearts, they passed the 2005 Detainee Treatment Act. And that thoroughly screwed us interrogators over big time. And it put an enormous amount of restrictions on our ability to get actionable intelligence, to get any kind of intelligence. And it also made it so you couldn't interrogate in that language. So even if you were an Arab linguist or a Farsi linguist, by law, you weren't actually allowed to utilize it.
Interesting.
You had to ask your questions in English, and then they would be translated by, in our case, they were Cat 2 and Cat 3 linguists. So that is a US citizen with a secret or top secret clearance. So these weren't just local nationals we were using. These were vetted, cleared individuals to be a part of this program. And you ask the question, your interpreter would translate it and do that, and it goes back and forth like that. And that's so that way all your interrogations are monitored too. They're being videoed and listened in on, and you have people who are listening and monitoring your interrogations the whole time too. So they're there to see if you screw up. And your all your questions have to be in English, so that way they can hear it, they can see it, they can see you didn't inadvertently ask them a question that has dual meaning or triple meaning, and perceived threat and whatnot. You couldn't overtly threaten a prisoner. That will land you in a world of UCMJ trouble and make your life a nightmare. And we had people who got in that kind of trouble. And it wasn't their fault. It was a fact that someone misinterpreted what they were saying and implied it to be something more than it was. And that was the tightrope we had to walk over in Iraq. And it was that really made the job hard, and it was very tough.
Jeez. Okay. So as you're going through the training, you kind of describe the detention center track, and then you also kind of get trained on this source operations. Amongst the 40 to 50 of you who are doing this, is there a feeling of like, oh, I hope I do more of this or that? Or is it just, who knows what we're going to get?
So when we were training, we didn't know 100% certain how it was all going to work, how it was all going to shake out, right? So at first, we were given a list of actual divisions we would be likely supporting when we deployed. And it really depended on because Iraq's broke down into regions. There were essentially like 4 major regions, whether you're dealing with the North, the West, the South, or Central. And depending on those regions, depended on what unit you were going to be potentially working with. We didn't find out until right before we were deploying that wasn't actually how it was going to work. We were all going to deploy as a singular unit to Baghdad, to Camp Cropper, because Abu Ghraib had just closed down and transferred everything to Cropper, and we would be working as one group there. We would still be broken down into regional support groups. So I was part of the North. I covered the Northern Iraq, and then my particular province that I specialized in was the Diyala province, which was in the process of completely going to crap at that particular time. So I arrived at the perfect time.
Just post Abu Ghraib, everything.
Because you just had the end of the second battle of Fallujah had just ended. Ramadi had just gotten cleaned up. I listened to Jocko Willick's talk, and he was talking about Task Force Bruiser and the times they were there. And I was like, man, everything they accomplished and did that summer of 2006 shifted that entire framework of organizations and terrorists out of Ramadi, and they all went into Diyala province, into Bakuba, Al-Khalis, and Muqtadiya, and just turned the whole province to just a tinderbox that just blew up on our faces. So it was interesting.
So just before you start getting into, so once you're in theater, I guess I'm wondering, because you had mentioned it as you were growing up that you had just like no confidence. At this time, before you go in and start doing this job for real, where's your confidence level at just with you as a person, maybe with this skill and what you're about to go do?
So when I got through the army, through basic training and whatnot, I think they really instilled and built an awful lot of confidence in me. So I was able to leverage that in college. I became significantly more outgoing, more confident, more outspoken. Um, developed a little bit more of those leadership skills. I had some really good, and I know it's the guard. I know people have their opinions of the guard and whatnot, but I still had some really good NCOs inside there,
Yeah.
and our unit was one of these. They're kind of like tagged as like a rapid deployment type unit, and we were specifically designed and designated to rapidly deploy to Korea should things ever kick off. Being a northern unit, self-propelled artillery unit, we fit in really well with the Korean set over there. We did. That's why we did an annual training in the summer, and we did an annual training in the winter for Arctic training. So we did a lot more time in training on doing active duty style type training than a traditional guard unit would do. And so I had some good NCOs that really helped model me and train me to become a little bit more of a better leader, so to speak. My biggest struggle was when I transitioned from the Army to the Air Force, because the culture is so diametrically different. The way the ranks interact with each other, the way the officers interact with the NCOs was dramatically different too. Um, Maybe I'm wrong, but in the Army side of the things, the NCOs tend to really run the roost. And you have a really good platoon sergeant and a master sergeant and the first sergeant. They damn well run the company.
If you want the company to run right, that's how it should run.
Correct.
Yes.
And typically the officer, the captain, tended to just sign the checks and make sure nobody got, he kind of provided the top cover, and they made him look good by doing that.
Yeah.
And same with the platoon. Your platoon sergeant, we usually tell the butter bar, hey, look, I understand you're energetic. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to train you. We're going to show you how it really works.
Yep.
And if you just stay out of our way, we're going to make you look like a rock star, and you're going to get fast tracked up to captain and major and so on. Just don't micromanage us. that worked. Air Force, opposite side, opposite way. Man, there's an officer led and run through and through organization. That was a little bit harder for me to transition and deal with that particular piece, because I wasn't used to master sergeants and senior master sergeants really kowtowing to second lieutenants and captains.
Yeah.
Kind of letting them kind of run roughshod on the shops.
Wow.
And it could literally just be that was my squadron experience too, because I didn't stay in long enough to go to multiple squadrons and experience different squadrons. So that could also just be the way it was at my squadron too. So let me preface that,
No, I got you.
But going into Iraq, you build up that confidence. I mean, at first you're a little nervous because, now it's shifting to, it's real world. This is real now,
Yeah.
And I remember we got off the plane in Kuwait, and I was thinking to myself, wow, this is hot. And I'm like, and it's freaking 1 a.m. And it's like,
it's so hot in Kuwait.
Oh, it reminded me of that movie. Was it Biloxi Blues? When I think it was Matthew Broderick. I can't remember. One of the characters, he gets off the airplane. He's like, oh, God, it's hot. This is Africa hot. I was like, yep, this is Middle East hot.
Yeah.
And the next day we were at Camp Buring after driving for hours in the desert, lost as can be. And we finally arrive at Camp Buring and get settled in. And we eat some chow. And then the next morning we wake up, and I remember walking over near the flight line at Camp Buring and seeing a pair of Marine Cobra gunships fully kitted out with their rocket pods and missiles, and thinking to myself, wow, arrived.
It's
the real deal, man.
Yeah.
Those are real missiles and real rockets on that helicopter.
So just before we get into your first interrogation, and maybe this is with hindsight, like looking back after you've already done this now and all the research you've done in books, what are some of the traits that make a really good interrogator?
Oh, those are tough, because I don't want to say it's situation dependent. Each interrogation, each prisoner is very unique in what they need. And so sometimes that's good and bad. I think as an interrogator, You need to be a very inquisitive person. You need to be a very patient person. You need to be able to control your emotions and your temper really, really well. And you also, you need to be a relative. I hate to say this, I don't mean it in a negative sense, but you need to be, you need to be a relatively smart person, because you're absorbing a tremendous amount of information. You're having to recall a tremendous amount of information, and you have to do it very quickly. So, like if you're in the booth and you're talking with, a prisoner, and he mentions, and he's captured in, say, this, village X, and 2 days ago you were interrogating another guy from village X. You want to be able to recall the prisoner's name, what he was involved in, and what he was there, why he got captured, and maybe ask your guy in front of you about that, because he may have some insight he can give you on your other prisoner, or he may know about him or know some other information. But if you're not able to retain and recall information about prisoners, and sometimes you're recalling information from prisoners from 2-3 months ago or more, and or recalling information about landmarks inside of a village, or this shop is on this street in this area, or what about what happened over here, and being able to recall a terrorist attack or a bombing or an IED attack happened on this day in this location here, because he may have some information on it. That's really hard to do if you're not able to recall the information and retain it and hold on to it and figure out how to leverage it. Not everyone was good at that. And you don't always have to be a good interrogator to be able to do that, but it helps. It helps a lot.
How about after an interrogation? Are you writing up a report on that?
Yep.
Is it
Yep.
transcribed by someone else, or is that you like putting in the context, the atmospherics, all of that?
Yeah. So you have usually there's at least one report you have to write. It's mandatory report you have to write. That's your post-interrogation report, your notes. And then you have to write, if you obtain any intelligence, then you write your IIRs, your intelligence information reports. You want to get those pieces out. So after the interrogation, typically what you do is you list the approaches you used, you list the topics you discussed, and then you talk about, what approaches did the detainee respond to? What did he not respond to? What information did he actually give you? Do you believe it to be accurate? Was it able to be supported? Did it coincide with anything else? What are your general thoughts of this whole thing? And then, what are your recommendations to happen next? Like, what do you want to do with this guy afterwards? Are you going to retain him because you still believe he has intelligence value? It's just going to take more time to get it out of him. Or have you made the assessment, this guy doesn't have any further value to us, let's just go ahead and kick him to long-term detainment and move on to the next guy? Because when I first arrived in Iraq, we were capturing roughly 200 to 300 prisoners a week, give or take, across the whole AOR. So it's not just one, it's just our AOR. Of one's coming into Camp Cropper, which is the TIF, the Theater Internment Facility for Central Processing and Interrogation. And our camp at Cropper, we could hold 5,500 people. And then down south at Camp Buka, that's a long-term detainment facility. So we had a small interrogation team down there, and they would just continue to talk to people, or people, new information comes out or is requested about prisoners down there. That's what they were there for. That facility also had prisoners. So in total, we started with probably around 10 to 12,000 prisoners in theater at the start of our tour, which was in October of 2006. When we left in October of 2006, towards the end of that month, that number had swelled to a little over 30,000. So in the year we were there, it was quite busy. And our new prisoners coming in went from 200 and 300, a week, give or take. And they don't come in all at once. They're, 30, 40 people per day or per chop like that. And sometimes they come in different waves. You'll have a Conair flight from Mosul come in. You'll have a convoy come in from the Marines from out west. people coming in on convoy from Baghdad. So they all come in at different hours and different times of the day. But generally speaking, in a week, it's going to roughly average 200. You could hit a spike of maybe 400 if it was a big operation. Wow. During the surge, that's when everything went into high gear, because we didn't just get 30,000 run-of-the-mill Army grunts. We got 30,000 infantry bubbles. 30,000 shooters showed up, and they were eager for a mission. They were there to kill things and kill and capture people. That's all they wanted to do. Our count went from 200 to 300 to between 400 and 600 a week coming in. So that was quite big. And we didn't get an increase in interrogators.
Of course not.
Of course not. So suddenly, you're being handed just cases left and right. It was not uncommon to come in and say, hey, Rosone, by the way, you got 4 new prisoners to interrogate, or here's a pack of 6 new prisoners to go interrogate, figure out if they're worth keeping or not. And meanwhile, you're looking over at your desk and seeing, damn, I've got like 17 on the table right now. I just got six more. And you got to figure out, who am I going to keep? Who am I going to kick out? Because you have some that are really high value and they're slow burners. They don't give up a lot of stuff right away. It's going to take time to pick it out. And I had one prisoner who we can talk about later on, who has a really deep ties to both to Bakuba, but also to Germany. And go figure, he was from Munich, and we actually lived in Munich the same times. We actually lived on the same block in Munich and frequented the same places. So we had that touch point and connection, so to speak. It was very scary to think about. This guy was working for Al Qaeda at the exact same time I was living there. And the fact that we may have seen each other. But that was a long case. That case lasted 12 months. And there were items that he would tell me about. And I would send an RFI back to U.S. Army Europe and have the G2 or go and find it for me. They would task collectors to go into Munich and some of these other cities to locate information, take pictures, question certain things, and then they would send it back to me. And then I'd go back in and talk to my prisoner and ask him about these things. And likewise, they would find other people they thought were related to him or were part of a certain circle of things going on, and they'd send all that stuff to me. And I'd go into my prison, with him and start talking about it too. And so it was a big sharing circle between Europe and what I was doing. But at the same point, my management didn't really like all that going on. As cool and sexy as that was, the argument I was being given from them was, look, this is cool. This has nothing to do with your mission in Iraq. And I was like, well, I get that, but it is kind of a strategic value of uncovering where these other Al Qaeda cells are in Europe and that are connected to here. Don't you think we should do that? So, by name request, the U.S. Army Europe was requesting me by name to handle a small segment of prisoners that they'd sent the prisoners' numbers for, and a very specific request to our Army commander, our task force commander. Hey, we need these people interrogated, and we really want this guy to be the one to do it.
Wow,
interesting. Just keep it going.
Whoa.
That's the only reason I got to keep those guys.
Because they just liked the intel that was coming out of it, or at least the approach you were taking.
Yeah, well, we were getting things. That was the trick. We were actually getting intelligence for them, and it wasn't actionable for Iraq. It wasn't actionable for a unit here, but it was very relevant to what they were doing in Germany.
For sure.
And and they're sharing that with the BND, and so it was a very relevant thing of what was going on there as an active case, and so they wanted to keep that thing going. But at the same point, we're really pressed on time, and my focus is supposed to be on rooting out what's going on in Bakuba and Al-Khalis and Muqtadiya and some of these other, the Diyala River Valley, not necessarily chasing down leads and stuff for Germany.
In Yukon. As you prepped for a particular interrogation, just a run-of-the-mill, every other day type interrogation, and I'm just curious because coming out of like the pilot world, we have a very strict, here's what we do when we wake up, we pre-flight, we mission brief, we have our things that we do. What does an interrogator do pre-interrogation to get prepped, or what did you do?
So a lot of that actually does happen the night before you do it. So what you do when you finish your interrogations for the day and you've turned in all you submit all your reports, all your intel reports, what ends up happening next is you put together the next day's interrogation plan, because we have to hand over the the prisoner numbers to the MPs so they can have them ready to be brought to you the following day. Make sure they're not in any kind of segregation or separated camps or medical, any kind of things like that. So you would go through and say, okay, of my cases, my 24 cases or 23 cases, who am I going to talk to today? And I pick out which ones I'm going to go for. I try to find ones who tended to be close to certain villages or captured in certain areas. So I kind of cluster them, so to speak. It makes it easier to remember the data and all the information. I don't want to talk to a guy who's in Muqtadiya, but with another guy who's in Alcalas and another guy in Bakuba. It's really hard to keep all the different organizations, what's going on in those cities separate. So it's much easier to talk to like 3 guys or 4 guys from Bakuba and just really hammer that section really good than to try and split yourself. And not every interrogator did that, but that was my approach. Mm-hmm. And once I kind of figure out how I'm doing that, you got to go and get your interrogation plan and went on approved by behavioral psychologists. So an 06, who's a psychologist, has to look at it, look at your approaches. He'll question you, ask you why you're doing this, why you're doing that. How do you think this approach is going to work? What if he doesn't respond to this? What's your next step? And really kind of help you out with that. Now that was good and bad. They did kind of get in the way a little bit, but at the same point, if you were smart, you could leverage the heck out of these guys. So I'd say, all right, so we allowed to curse or anything on this thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so I would go to this colonel, and he's really good psychoanalyst, and say, okay, no, how do I skull fuck this guy? Like, how do I really get into this guy's head? And he would really tell me the kind of psychological things that you would never do to a patient. But he'd tell me how to do this to a prisoner to get the information we need. And there's very specific things you could do because you can't physically harm a prisoner. And we weren't allowed to do pharmaceutical interrogations. A lot of other things we weren't allowed to do. The one thing that was totally wide open for us to do was psychological and mental, which, to be honest with you, I think that was far, far more damaging and worse to do to a prisoner than any physical thing you could do. You can heal from physical wounds. You cannot heal from the mental skull fucking that happens by interrogators sometimes. It breaks you. Same with pharmaceutical interrogations. It's a much friendlier way of getting information than the psychological route we were unfortunately left to use. And so he would help me out with a lot with just getting in their head and figuring out, how do I do this? How do I manipulate their family without crossing the line to get what I need to give the goods? And that's very hard to figure out without crossing the legal lines. And then we also had to get our JAG to sign off on it. So they would look at your approach, make sure legally you're in compliance. Make sure, how are you going to approach this? What are you going to say and do? So, you can't do certain things. You can't do X, Y, and Z without getting in trouble or whatever. Like, yes, I agree with that. Or it'd say, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z. Am I going to get in trouble? And they'll be, all right, well, why don't you walk us through it? So you walk them through it and they go, I'll observe it. And I'm going to say right now, you won't, but the lines. And I'll observe it to verify and cover your ass if something does come up. Like, okay. And that really helped a lot. We would also work with them to maybe draft up a fake immunity agreement. That was a really big one. So basically go to a prisoner and just like, look, dude, I recognize you were wrongly accused. You're here for the wrong reasons. You got wrapped up, but at the end of the day, they're willing to give you this immunity agreement. So if you're willing to just come clean and just tell them everything that you've been involved with and who they all are and help us arrest the people who should be here, blah, blah, blah. We can get this immunity agreement signed and we can work and get you out of this camp in a few weeks. Now that didn't always work, but there'd always be a couple, guys who, didn't have a full box of rocks and they would readily agree to that. And they read it and see it and go, oh, that's great. All right, I'll do this. And, they get diarrhea of the mouth. And next thing you know, they've narked on the whole cell and you get all the information you need to go hit the target and take them all down. And then summarily when that happens and you've got everything, congratulate the guy and let them know, hey, by the way, we're going to send you on this flight and you're going to go to out processing. And he's like, okay. So he's not balking at being picked up for the Con Air bus to Buka. Arrives at Buka and he's in process for Buka. And he's like, what the hell? Like, well, it'll happen at some point, 2-3 years down the road. But, we got the intel we needed and we stayed within the guidelines and the law, what we were allowed to operate in. And that was a very, very strict guidelines for that that 2005 Detainee Treatment Act was very explicit in what you were and were not allowed to do and use. So you just had to work within the rules we were given, within the box you're given.
Okay, so that's an interesting setup. So that's how you prep. We know what happens on the back end. If you can take us in maybe to the first time you're going into the room, like what does that feel like?
Okay, yeah, my first interrogation was absolute disaster. So I'm in here, this first interrogation, I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna see my first prisoner finally, right? I'm all excited. And my Air Force interrogator that I'm replacing, there was another Air Force team that went in just before us, and we were swapping out with them. He just was exhausted. And part of me was like, man, why is this guy so exhausted, dejected? He's so cynical, blah, blah, blah. And little did I know, within 6 months, I'd be right where he is. Because I was coming in, full of piss and vinegar and all excited to do this mission. And he's just tired and beat down. And we get in there, we start talking with this guy, and this prisoner's just crying. And I didn't do this, and I just want to be back with my family, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm telling you everything I know, and going on and on and on. And like a sucker, I'm falling for this guy and believing him. And, I want to help him. And, I want to try and I want to try and verify his information. And maybe he tells me this, we can try to work something out. And the guy I'm replacing is just like, oh, go ahead, dude. Go ahead. Make your mistakes. Beat it up. Beat it up. You're going to learn. You're going to learn.
Is he in the room with you at that time, James?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So basically what you do is you left seat, right seat. So the first couple of interrogations, I'm watching him. And I'm thinking to myself, man, why is this guy asking this? Why is he circling around this? Why is he drilling down on this? And then it became my turn. And suddenly I was in the driver's seat. I'm like, asking him questions. He's giving me the sob stories, giving me the runaround. He's giving me fake stories, all this other stuff. And some of it, I'm just falling head over heels for and believing, because I don't know any better. I'm an idiot. I just, training's one thing, but it's actually sitting there with a real prisoner. It's a whole nother ballgame. And, it was just an eye-opening experience, because training only takes you so far. And then when you get in there, you see when you're flying helicopters, it's one thing to train how to react to sapphire when it starts to come up and at you, or how to react when your helicopter starts taking hits. It's a whole nother thing when it actually happens. Yeah. Just uniquely different experience. So for me, that was a little bit of a shock. But the one thing I remember, my very first interrogation, when I was walking in, and I was doing left seat, right seat, so I was observing at the time, is the smell. So these prisoners, they have the ability to shower. Most of them don't really take that choice, or if they do, they do it once a week. Well, it's really hot in Iraq, and they don't like to wear deodorant, and they're prisoners, so they don't have access to deodorant, and so they stink, and they stink really bad. And that was an overwhelming smell, so to speak, that hits you. And then naturally there's a smell of the camp. You got 5,000 hot, sweaty, unwashed bodies sweltering in the heat. You've got porta-johns with feces and shit from 5,000 people sweltering in the heat. You've got food waste and garbage from 5,000 people sweltering in the heat. It is a very unique experience walking into the camp and getting hit with all that. And so I'm on night shift, to start. So my shift's from 9 at night to 9 in the morning, a little cooler at night. And we're in there, we did interrogation. He kind of ends it after 30 minutes, and we were scheduled for 2 hours. And I'm thinking, man, why are we in this thing so soon? I'm asking him questions about this as we start walking back. And all of a sudden the incoming alarms start going off. He's like, quick. So we dive into one of the bunkers on our way back. And then a couple of these 240 millimeter rockets slam into the outer wall of the camp, and just shake the hell out of the whole place. And I'm like, holy crap, man. We almost got, blown up here. These things are only like, 400 or 500 yards away on the opposite end of a T-wall, hitting and whatnot. And just, that was a rude awakening, hitting that, and just having to realize that not only are you having to interrogate these guys, you're also having to deal with IDF attacks, and everything else that goes on with being on a fob and dealing with all that. I mean, I wasn't an operator going out on the wire and dealing with getting nailed with IEDs and small, ambushes and small arms fire and things like that. I was stuck. I was by and large, most of the time stuck on a fob, and I just had to take it. And I couldn't defend
Yeah.
myself. I couldn't shoot back. I couldn't like move a vehicle around. I couldn't see something and say, okay, let's not go there and move over here or call EOD. No, we just had to sit there and take it on the chin. And that was not a cool feeling, especially when your base is getting hit a lot.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do about it. You just got to sit there and take it and hope one doesn't land near you or next to you.
What was two questions here as you describe the smell in that room? Can you
Mhm.
give us like what does the scene look like in the room?
Sure.
Like is it I'm picturing, a movie, right? So like a lone light hanging and a small desk. Like what does it actually look like when you're
Not
going
too
in there?
far off. So our interrogation rooms were actually Connex boxes, shipping containers, believe it or not. So the shipping container was usually divided it was a steel corrugated steel container. It was divided into two segments. So you had two interrogation booths on either side with a metal door. You walk in, it's linoleum floor, metal walls. Usually there's one or is either sometimes it is just a hanging light. Sometimes it's a fluorescent light panel
Mhm.
that's up there, but it's not a terribly lot of light. Um, and there's just a table and three or four chairs. Sometimes you might have, so we're in tiger teams. So you have an analyst that directly works with you on all of your
Ah,
cases, which is a huge asset and tool to leverage. And so they would be in there, and by and large, my analyst was a heavy note taker. And so they'd be really good with taking a lot of the notes and then helping me with ask them about this or see about this, little details for me to circle in and ask. And then you had your interpreter. So the three of you constitute your tiger team. And then you have the prisoner. So depends how you want to set it up. You can either set up where you have the desk and the prisoner's opposite you and you're over here and the interpreter's in the middle. You can have it where you're here, the prisoner's here, and the interpreter's over here. Or you could have it where it's you and the prisoner are sitting in front of each other with your interpreter behind you or right next to you, however you want to work it. That's really on you to figure out what's best for you. And each interrogation is different. So each prisoner you want to do a different approach with. I've had some prisoners where, I'll get right up in their face, man. We're going to sit, and we're going to snuggle, man. We're going to be knee to knee. I know it stinks. We're going to be knee to knee. And we're going to be like this close to each other most of the time, talking really in their personal space. They don't like that. So it does kind of put them on a little bit on edge. Other times I tell my interpreter, always mimic my moves, always mimic my moves. If I'm talking softly, I want you talking softly. If I
yeah.
start to raise my voice, I want my voice. If I scream at this guy, I want you to scream at this guy. If I jump out of my chair and I'm in this guy's face, I want you jumping out of your chair in this guy's ear. Okay. So whatever I do, mimic it and just play along, because it's almost like acting in a way. It almost does come down to acting, so to speak. And you just need the team to all play their part, and for you to play your part as the interrogator to try and get the information from him. And again, every prisoner is different. Some prisoners need a father figure. Some prisoners need a big brother. Some people just need an asshole. And you just got to figure out what do they need relatively quickly, and then utilize the right approach, and then adjust the approaches you're able to, that you can use as needed, depending on the circumstances.
So one of the things that struck me as you and I were coordinating for this
Mhm.
interview was how much responsibility you felt for people outside the wire, right?
Mhm.
Like the Americans who were rolling out and kicking down doors and in harm's way. And you just
Yeah.
kind of, I think the setup you gave us of, hey, I'm on this fob, I can't go and do anything.
Mhm.
I'm just taking it on the chin. Can you talk a little bit more about how that develops in that year that you're there, like from when it
Yeah.
starts, and then how you kind of feel about that role you're playing? Because you are truly about to get intel that could save or change someone's life, really.
Absolutely. On a daily basis, that happens absolutely all the time. So when you're interrogating these prisoners, some of the prisoners are fresher than others. Some prisoners come to you and they've been at a division internment facility. And maybe they've been there for a week, 5 days or 7 days. Sometimes they come in and they've only been captured for 72 hours. Those prisoners, you tend to get a little more shock value out of, so to speak. But when you get intel and says, hey, we have, a no shit IED, guy, a builder that's located in this building. He's building IEDs in this shed. And here's the area, because we have like a thing like Falcon Light. It's like a really, really good high def version of Google Earth that we have now. But that's what we were using
Yeah.
back then before Google Earth. So we would zoom in And you could see the individual houses. You could see a shed in the backyard. You could see the details from an overview really, really well. So if you put together an intel package that says this guy is building IEDs, they're being built in this shed, they're being stored in this location here on the property, and you really fill out all the specs for the facility. You know, how should you approach this thing? What type of doors does it have? Where are they located? Do they open in?
Sorry, James, can I ask you, you're like building this picture as you're interrogating effectively?
Well,
like,
what I'll do is when I get the guy to cooperate and he wants to start telling me some information in exchange for something, because it's almost always, it's the tit for tat. You know, you give me something, I give you something. And so when you do that, you bring up, you have a laptop, you bring your laptop, your tough book in, and you pull up the map, and we start showing them the map.
Got it.
And I started saying, okay, well, let's look at this. This is your city. So let's just start zeroing down. This is the spot that the Army says they captured you. Is this right? And they'll kind of look at it and go, yeah, basically, or no, I was over here. Okay, let's go back to where you live. Or, hey, so you talked about Mohammed so-and-so. Why don't you show me where he is? I'm like, okay, well, he lives not far from marketplace so-and-so. You walk down this path, it's over here. So, okay, well, hold up. Let's go. Let's find the marketplace. So here's the marketplace. What's the path you're talking about? Look at this area here. Okay, so this path. Okay, so let's follow it down. So we go down this path. It's over here. This is the house. And you're like, yeah, that's the house. Okay, so start describing this thing to me. So he'll start describing the exterior as much as he can. And you're writing down all these details. You're doing screen grabs of the overview of the area, then screen grabs of very specific things on the property or where things are at, to put together for your package later. So once you've gotten all this detailed information from the suspect, the prisoner here, you make your IR, you put together your PowerPoint, you put all those pictures in there, you write all the little tabs on the side with arrows pointing to what to look for, what to look out for, what is a danger, all this detailed information along with your report. And then you put that together for your IR. And then that IR, you put in there the human collection requirements and the different PIRs. And depending upon the commander PIR for, say it was Bakuba, this is what's covered in Bakuba. We say, okay, well, that unit that's responsible for that AOR is going to be, whatever battalion with 101st or one of the other units. And it gets sent directly to that battalion or that brigades. Usually they're S2 or they're G2 or they're G2X. So they're going to look at that and go, oh, hey guys, we got a mission. And they're going to start spinning up, an operation to go action the mission, because now they have actionable intel to go take out an ID guy. So that's going to get action usually pretty quick. Usually within 24 to 40 hours, they're going to go hit that target because, hey, they're grunts. They're there to go shoot and blow things up. And you just gave them a target to go do that. Legit target to go do that. And they would much rather action things like this than just go ride on a convoy doing random patrols waiting to get hit. That kind of duty sucks. So much better to go hit an actual objective that may yield a result. And so you put all that stuff together and you go hit them. But, for me, what was really challenging was making sure you got to ask all the right questions and get all the right details, and you don't mess anything up or you don't miss something, and you're going to miss things, and it just happens. And, I had one prisoner, his last 3 digits of his detainee prisoner number were, go figure, of all things, 007. And this guy was a part of Iraqi Special Forces, part of their elite commando units. Prior to the fall, he had worked with the Iraqi intelligence service. So kind of like one of those agency direct action type units. It was kind of his background. So he was a real big player, knew what the hell he was doing. And he was one sick, sadistic man, really, really sick man. He just, the things this guy did was just war crime type stuff.
And he was just open about it.
Well, he wasn't at first. The first interrogation with this guy, he was providing us information on a U.S. person, that one of our soldiers who had been kidnapped. One of our U.S. soldiers who was an Iraqi interpreter had been kidnapped by Jaish al-Mahdi. He was providing us some intel on it because his organization wasn't directly involved, but obviously they knew what the hell was going on in the area. So it wasn't very actionable. But when I started talking with him, he basically was like, I was trying to figure out like what's your deal, because his background's quite unique. And you got to approach a guy like that way different than you approach just about anyone else, because he knows the skinny, he knows the deal, he knows what's up. It's like if a CIA guy's been captured, you know damn well how this story's going to work. You know what you're in store for. You know exactly what's going to happen, and you have two choices: play ball, or you're going to suffer a real lot of pain for a short period amount of time, and then you're going to play ball, because there's no way you're not. You're going to. That's the way this game works. And I said, look, this thing. I'm not gonna waste my time with you. So I'm gonna be very blunt and very direct. You have two choices. You can cooperate with me, and we can strike a deal, or you can play hardball. And I'm promising you, you are going to spend the next 3 to 5 years in Camp Bucca, wasting away in the sun until your government gets around to trying you. And you're a Sunni. You were part of this elite commando unit that I have to suspect was involved in a lot of atrocities under the former regime. And I don't know if you want to take your chances with the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Justice there. I think your best bet is to cut a deal with me. And he's like, all right, well, I'm trying to figure out how much I can trust you with things. I'm like, all right, well, let's build trust. Okay. How about you give up the goods on where your organization or your cell have been storing your weapons and IEDs and equipment, and we'll start building trust. You build trust with me, I'll build trust with you. And he's all right, we'll do that. So he gave up the information for that. It was in Alcalis area, just north of Fob Warhorse. And he told me very specifically, he says, your unit's going to want to travel down this particular route. And he showed me the exact route on the map. He says, they're going to want to go this way because this is the most direct way to go there. It's along the main MSR. This is how they're going to want to go, because this is what we've observed your units doing in the past. I was like, okay, well, this guy's obviously, they've obviously been watching us, how we operate, and why wouldn't they? This is what they're really good at this. So he tells us very specifically, don't turn down this road towards this area that I'm leading you to. This road, you're going to encounter an IED. And then when you get past that IED, there will be a subsequent ambush and a car bomb right here at this location here. And he gave us exact grid locations, told us exactly what they would all look like, where it was all at. And he says, you want to go this other route. That we don't have this one monitored and watched, and you guys have never gone this way. So go this way. It'll be a safe way to get to the objective. You'll hit it, because if you go the other way, you're going to get ambushed, and it's going to buy the time my guys need to get all the stuff moved out into another location. And we wrote all that up, sent that to Fob Warhorse, and we needed this intel to pan out, because he was providing intel on a substantial intel on a domestic plot that he had ties to from greater Al-Qaeda that was outside of Iraq. And we needed this to check out because we had to verify that. It was part of our vetting process, because he passed the polygraph. That was the killer. When we polygraphed this guy, he actually passed the polygraph on this domestic attack. And then when the FBI flew out there, their polygrapher examiner, he passed his. So we're all like shitting puppies here thinking, great, this is actually real. Like, well, one. We got to test, we got to vet this. So the unit was, they were directed, hell or high water, you're dropping everything you're doing. You're going to go action this right the heck now and go see if this is real. And that battalion.
James, are you trusting him? Like when he says, hey, go this route, don't take this. Like, are you trusting him at that point? You have a good enough feel at that time to say like, all right, this sounds legitimate.
That's what I don't know. And this is always the question, because you don't fully know. You can't fully trust these guys, but at the same point, you have to trust but verify. And at some point, you have to find some way to validate some of the information they're giving you. And that means you have to trust them at some point. And it's tough if you're putting lives on the line to do that. But thus far, his polygraphs have shown true. So we don't have a reason to believe he's not lying to us about this. And this is like a linchpin for kind of his deal to work. So we briefed this. The battalion commander decided they're going to action it right away. He looks at that. He looks at our recommendation. He looks at our warning. Says, I don't believe that. He's like, I don't believe that asshole. He's going to leave us right doing an ambush. So he goes down the road we tell him not to. He went down the MSR that our prisoner said explicitly don't go. Oh, yeah. He didn't listen to the prisoner. He's like, nope, it's an ambush. It's a setup. We're not trusting this guy. So he went down the standard route they've always gone down. And wouldn't you know it, they get ambushed right in the exact grid coordinates that our prisoner said it would happen. So the first vehicle gets hit with an IED, 2 soldiers get killed, a handful more get injured. So when they get that taken care of, I don't know how long that ended up taking, more than an hour or so to get taken care of. They pressed on to the next one. And instead of doubling back and going the route we told them, they just pressed on. And so when they pressed on, they hit the next ambush. This was a much larger car bomb. So this hit one of the Stryker vehicles. We had 4 Americans killed. We had a bunch more wounded and injured in the Stryker vehicle, and then there was a small engagement, and that lasted a little while. To their credit, they got the fight they wanted. They got to engage a bunch of Hajis. They got to light the place up and put a bunch of guys in the dirt. So that happened, but it also provided the time for, as our prisoner warned, the weapons and the explosives and everything to get moved out. So when our guys eventually hit the objective, which was probably 6 or 8 hours after they had set off to go do it, they found the building. They saw it had probably been recently used and occupied even, but everything that was supposed to be there was gone. And it was very frustrating. That battalion commander lit us up. He called back and he just tore into us about, he's like, we've been in country less than like, I think it was less than 2 or less than 3 weeks. We just lost 6 KIAs and 1 freaking mission. A bunch of other guys wounded, and all for a dry run for a freaking bust. You guys sent us out there. Our guys got killed and we didn't come away with anything. He was pissed, and, I'm at the same point, I'm like, we told you not to do this, but you should go this route explicitly. And we told you why and what not to do. And you didn't trust us. You didn't believe us because you didn't believe our prisoner. And I get that, but these guys dying, that's not on us. We warned you and you didn't heed that warning and your guys got killed. And after the first one, you could have doubled back and gone the way we told you. And you still didn't. You pressed on anyways. That's when you lost more guys, but you would deal with situations like that. And you're sending guys out, you're putting these packages together. They're getting actioned all the time. And most of the time, nobody's getting hurt. And you come away with a bunch of prisoners. Sometimes a big firefight breaks out and a bunch of Iraqis get killed. And maybe an American gets killed or gets injured. But, over a course of a year, it was tough. I think it was like, we had 26 guys killed on missions we authored, probably triple that were wounded. The Iraqi death count was ridiculously high. There's a point I just stopped paying attention to it because I didn't want to see how many guys were getting killed on each of these targets, because it was adding up. When you start breaking past 100, it's kind of like, I don't really want to keep track of this anymore. Yeah.
What is the dynamic like on the fob? Because you actually get to, I assume these are being targeted, or maybe not. I guess my assumption was you would know some of the people who are going out and doing the hits, or you'd be on the same fob as them, but maybe not, based on the area you're covering. You're collecting intel from one fob, and then maybe it's being delegated out for another unit at another fob to go hit. You'll never see them, right?
Depending on what sector you were in. So for me, because I was covering the north and covering Diyala province, the predominance of units that I was providing intel was out of Fob Warhorse. And then I can't remember the life of me, the fob that was up in Muqtadiya and some of the other ones along the Iranian border. So those were the units I was predominantly supporting. Our units who were doing central, supporting Baghdad, which predominantly was going to be targeting the Jaish al-Mahdi, the Shia organizations. Some of their units did operate out of Victory Base, whether it was Liberty or Stryker. We lived on Camp Stryker. We worked on Camp Copper, but we lived on Camp Stryker, and we had a brigade combat team that was there with us. Some like 10,000 soldiers were on our particular fob. So there were a lot of units going out on a nightly and daily basis, and you'd see them rolling in at night and after a tough night of patrols or after ambushes, and you'd see them going out on them too. But I did directly support those specific units. We did have interrogators who did. But I remember running at night one time and seeing a whole column just getting ready to head out on a patrol. There was an Abrams battle tank, a couple Bradleys, some Strikers. There was a big hit they were going out on. And it was neat to see the Abrams and all these guys rolling, out the fob to go hit, do what they were going to go do. and see that. That was kind of, for me, it was kind of a surreal feeling, kind of a neat to see some of that happening, intermixed with, you're not far from the airfield either, from Biop. So you'd have we didn't have Marines, we didn't have Cobras there. We had a lot of Apaches. So a lot of the Apaches would be going up to do their missions. RPC Central, the Siege Soda group, the Special Forces were near us for there. So they had their CH-53s, flying overhead at night all the time. Then you had, standard Blackhawks and Chinooks and stuff. So it was neat seeing all that stuff, hearing all that stuff, being around it. And, you're on a fob though. So, I mean, it is the fob life, it's going to the chow hall, if you got time, work out. A lot of guys would do that. Me, I looked at it this way. I was there for one purpose and one purpose only. My mission was to hunt terrorists, either capture, kill these bastards, and bring as many as we can down in the time I have in Iraq. So I didn't waste a lot of time, trying to hit the gym or trying to buff up while I'm in Iraq, or just doing a lot of things with MWR and different things like that. For me, work was all consuming. I was there to eat, sleep, and just interrogate as many people as I humanly can in the time of day I had allotted to me. And I burned myself out really fast and really hard. But when you're seeing results, it's hard to step back and say, well, I should step back on the pedal here and relax. But, you also hear about more and more guys getting killed and more ambushes happen.
And they don't have the luxury either to like,
no, they're going out every day.
They need you to do that.
Yeah, they're going out on 16, 18-hour patrols and gone all day doing that stuff. How can I sit here and say, well, I'm here for 12 hours, but I'm going to go find a way to spend an hour, 2 hours of that at the gym, when I could be spending that time interrogating one or two more people, or doing more research to understand my AOR better.
What about if we think of some of the tougher interrogations you sat in, or the more memorable ones? Are there some that come to mind that you still think about, or that as you look back, you're like, man, that was a tough one, or it was a long case, as you kind of described?
So there's two I'll tell you about. One was a false flag interrogation we did. That was a very unique interrogation that required a lot of approval. I had a lot of visitors watch it because maybe 3 or 4 happened in all of Iraq. It just was a very rare thing to see and have done, but it worked, and we pulled it off. And there was 3 of us interrogators to make that work. That was pretty neat. And then I'll tell you about another one, probably one of the hardest ones I've done that's kind of stuck with me a lot. And in that particular one, I was actually interrogating a 15-year-old kid. And that was a very unique and challenging interrogation. I'll tell you about that one too, because that was a rough one. But the false flag one, so this was my German case, my German guy. And he kept wanting to talk to some German representatives and to get them to validate his portion of his story and and basically believe that would clear him. We had intel that was never going to clear him. He was involved in, basically collecting donations for the cause throughout the different mosques and things like that in Europe. He was a financier, and he would collect a lot of his money. They would go and either purchase or would get donated very, very high-end Mercedes and BMWs and Audi vehicles. We're talking typically $100,000 plus vehicles that were either being bought or donated through these different actions, these different mosques. The vehicles would subsequently be shipped to Kuwait, where an intermediary would pick them up, and then they would be driven up into Baghdad. And then one or two things would happen. The vehicles would either be sold to anyone who wanted to buy one of these cool vehicles, and they're getting it for a discount from what it would normally be sold at a dealership, but they had to pay cash, and so they would get the cash. And maybe it's $100,000 sale. Well, that $100,000 then would be used to finance 20 or 30 or 50 Al-Qaeda operatives to basically work for the next several months. And it would fund these different cells to do very specific acts, whether it's surveillance or sniper operations or IEDs, or being used to purchase IED material to keep building things. And that was a major way that they were using to funnel money into the country, was through those kinds of high-end purchases. And then they would obviously sell cars that were, 50,000 or maybe 30,000 and take the money, because that would be a faster way also to make quicker sales and keep the money coming. And then the other one they would do is take these high-end cars and they would rig these things as car bombs, because who would suspect $130,000, BMW, 7 Series rolling up towards a fob as being an IED, as being a car bomb? You'd think that that's a dignitary or an official coming up, a tribal sheikh, someone coming up important. And these vehicles would come up, or they would get somewhat close to a convoy, an important convoy, and detonate themselves and wipe out a chunk of the convoy. Because you don't think of a 7 Series, $100,000 car,
no,
as a car bomb.
No.
You think of these, little piece of crap bongo trucks and these, little taxis and things like that, because that's typically what they are. And so there's a very effective way to do that. And our guy got caught because some of the when the bombs, obviously forensics investigations when the bombs happen, and you can get a lot of data from that. And they got the serial numbers from some of the equipment and from some of the parts of the vehicle. When they did a raid, that was in the database, put into the database. When they did a raid on someone who happened to be this guy's brother, they found a lot of shipping receipts. And on the shipping receipts, when they scanned them in, some of the serial numbers matched to some of the car bombs. So that's how they pieced together that he was the facilitator. Wow. Picking up the stuff on one end and put a bolo out for the guy on the receipt who was shipping them from Europe. And that happened to be my prisoner. So when he left Europe, came to Iraq to pick up his wife and move her back to Europe, he was literally months away from getting his residency card in Germany at that point too. He should have waited. He got caught on a bolo based on all that. And so now he's in our custody. So now I'm, got to interrogate him. And he wanted the Germans involved and all this other stuff like that. But towards the end of our time there, we had 3 months left in our tour, and we decided, let's pull a false flag on this guy. And so I had 2 other interrogators. One of them was actually our instructor back in Fort Huachuca. He had come over as a contractor to work with us. And so he was fluent in German, native speaker, fluent. And one of the Army interrogators who had also joined us 6 months into our tour, she was also a native German from Germany. And so their German was flawless, and they knew how the whole system worked. So we were able to make a case. We made it up where they were German B&D, and they came in. I set it up and said, all right, fine, tomorrow you can have your meeting with the Germans. So Wow. Be prepared to answer their questions, because you're going to be fully truthful with these guys. Because if you're not, they're probably not going to take you back, and they're going to be here with me. So they came in, pretend to be Germans, civilian clothes, and they're talking German the entire time. They never once spoke English, all German. And he spoke fluent German too. So they're talking with this guy, and they're like, look, you're going to have to tell these guys something and give up some kind of goods, or tell them about X, Y, or Z, or confirm this thing here, to get us to get you out. And then also these names here, which were names we knew about that were operatives in Germany, or in Europe, not just in Germany, but in Europe, we needed him to confirm them, that he knew him or had contact with him. And that would be their justification to retrieve him from our clutches and take him back home, where they could interrogate him in peace and tranquility and all the niceties. So he sung like a bird for these guys and just opened up the whole case. Wow. And that was like 9 months of work to get to that point. Hundreds of hours of interrogations to get there. And he finally opened it up, and we had this huge cornucopia of information flowing from him, and it just connected the dots to like a gazillion different things going on in Europe, Horn of Africa, all over the Middle East. Yeah. It was like a big Pandora's box, and got a lot of evals out of that one.
I'm sure.
And then a lot of interesting questions from a lot of other agencies on that one, and it worked. Wow. And so that was pretty neat to see that happen and how it actually transpired. Of course, he was not happy with me the next a couple of days later when he found out that it was ruse and he was not going anywhere and everything. And he was staring at my pen, and his foot's shaking really bad. He's just like gritting. Wow. Like, why are you staring at my pen so intently? And he's like, I'm trying to decide if I'm going to grab this pen and stab you to death with it. And I was like, really? Well, let me make it easy for you. So I picked up the pen, I put it right in front of him. I said, you're free to try anytime you want, but in the meantime, you're answering my fucking questions. And he's just like, and
Oh,
my interpreter and my analyst behind me are like, oh my God, you just put it in front of him. They're like freaking out. He's gonna grab this pen and start stabbing us all to death. And I was
I
like,
just would
whatever.
assume that this guy would shut down after that, and it's like
He did
it's a
after
trump
that. Oh, he did
card,
after that. Yeah, well, we were gone
but
after.
like you need it, you got the goods, but you just assume like, hey, after this, we're probably getting nothing.
Oh yeah, you're getting nothing.
Man,
This is all or nothing. This is all or nothing. All the chips on
that's
the table. You're either
sneaky. I
gonna
love it.
score or you're not. And
Damn.
so because your rapport is blown. I mean, you've destroyed any
Yeah,
trust
it's gone.
after
You're right.
that. So that's why when I went in, I knew this was my last interrogation with him. I was just wrapping up a couple of questions, a couple little things like that. And just kind of breaking the news that he wasn't going to Germany, that he was staying here, and this wasn't looking good for him. And he
Oh
was
man.
pissed. But frankly, I'm surprised he didn't take the pen. I put it in front of him. Yeah, it's probably a
Yeah.
stupid move on my part, but I was just trying to challenge him. I wanted to basically let him know that you're not in charge. You have no power here. I have absolute authority and power over you. And we just hoodwinked you, you know?
Yeah. Damn.
So that was scary.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting thing. So that was probably that was one of the biggest cases I had. And then the one that really was the tough one that really sucked was his 15-year-old kid, right? So he got caught placing ID on the road. The unit saw him placing it, and they stopped. They didn't get a hit, and they chased him down on foot and nabbed him. And so we have him. So I see, I'm like, great, it's a 15-year-old kid. I have like 72 hours to get whatever I'm getting out of this kid, because we got to kick him loose, because we're not allowed to hold kids for very long periods of time. We have to kick them loose. So you have a very finite window to get anything out of them. They don't know that, but I do. So we do this harsh interrogation tactic. We're gonna go over there, we do full fear up harsh. We're gonna try and just scare the daylights out of this guy, get this kid just to give up the goods. And his dad and his brother, his dad and his three brothers are what we're after. They're real big bomb makers for the northern Baghdad belt up in Beiji, just touching on Diyala province. And they're the ones making all these big car bombs. They've just been hammering us. So we're after those guys. So we have them in the holding cell. We're coming by. We're shouting things through the little door at them. We're kicking the cell door to kind of stir them up and scare them. And the holding cells are small. They're not big enough to lay down in. There's no chair in there. There's no nothing to sit on. It's just kind of a small square yellow box. And it's yellow intentionally, because the color yellow and a yellow light is a very psychologically unsettling feeling to the mind and the body. And so you put them in there kind of the stew, and they can't lay down. It's not big enough. So they just have to kind of sit there and, knees up, whatever. And it's not the most comfortable place to be for an extended period of time. We left the stew there for probably like 5 or 6 hours before we pulled them out. Normally they're only there for maybe a couple hours. And we bring him in, and he's a smart ass little kid. He's got this smirk on his face, like, I'm 15, you can't do anything to me, whatever, little attitude. And, so my interpreter and I, we're like, all right. So we went in knowing we were going to do certain things. So we knew we were going to go in and start smoking cigars. And we wanted to kind of blow the smoke in his face a little bit and kind of throw him off kilter. And
Why is that? Like, what was the decision there? Like,
well,
why would that throw him off, I guess?
it may not, but for our perspective, because, we would offer prisoners cigarettes, they could smoke in the cells. Mm-hmm. They could smoke in there. We could smoke with them. There was no big deal. You could smoke a hookah pipe with them. I've done that plenty of times. Smoke cigars. It just depends. For me, what I was trying to do was set up a scene where this 15-year-old kid doesn't know what's going on. He just knows he's in a lot of trouble. And we wanted to, have the cigars and the smoke, and just, we were going to start out kind of calm and try to see if we can't, convince him to cooperate. If that didn't work, we were going to go balls of the wall, angry interrogator approach, and just get in his face and try to scare him then. So we tried the first approach. That didn't work. He just became a cocky little kid and didn't want to cooperate at all. So then I turned to my interpreter. I'm like, okay, it's game on. So when I asked him one more question, he just gives me this, shit-eating grin, smirk of, I'm not going to do this. And I was like, okay. So I slapped the table. I'm like, listen up, you little SOB. You're going to answer my effing questions. And I stand up, I grab the corner of the the table, and I fling it in the air, and smash it in the wall, and I grab my chair and I bash it against the wall right in front, right near him, and he's like, oh, he falls out of his chair, and he's like backpedaling into the corner of the room of the booth. We're on him now. Now we're totally on, like, drill sergeants in basic training, when they do that shark attack, they get right on you. So we're right on this guy, and I'm screaming in one ear, and then I'm whispering in the other ear, and I'm screaming in one ear and I'm whispering in the other ear, and my interpreter's doing the same thing. He's playing along with this thing like really good. And, we dropped the cigars at this point. We're just, full on this guy. And I'm like, all I want is for you to tell me where your dad and your brothers are located. And we went around like that for a few minutes. And finally he's like, okay, I'll tell you. I will, but you got to promise me you're not going to kill him. I said, look, kid, dead man can't talk, right? You agree with me, right? A dead person cannot talk, right? And I get him to agree to that. Like, okay, I can't talk to your dad and your brother if they're dead, right? Like, yes. So I don't want to kill them, do I? No. Okay, so that's settled. Show me where they are so we can capture these guys at night, take them prisoner, and I can talk to them. And then you're going to go home, okay? That's how it's going to work. And he eventually gives up the goods and where they are. And during the course of asking what was going on, one of the questions I forgot to ask was with the doors, the locks, right? And you don't realize like the minutia of details you have to ask when you're doing these things. And it's not enough to know if the doors open in or out, because it's going to determine, do you hit it with a ram? Do you put chains on it and then yank it out with a vehicle? Are there locks? Are the locks on the center? Are they on the floor? Are they on the ceiling? Are they both? Because then you need to know, do you need to go in there with a shotgun and a slug to, bust the locks out before you action the door? And all that's really important for a raid, because you want to go in there and hit it fast. You want to take them down, whether in their sleep or they're just startled, before they can get to their weapons. This way, nobody gets hurt. You get a live prisoner and your guys don't get injured in the process. And throughout the interrogation, it could just be I wasn't used to interrogating a 15-year-old, so some things I missed, but I didn't ask about the lock piece. And I did, and then there's a lock piece and the door opening in or out. So when the unit went to action at that night, they ran into a problem trying to breach the door. They saw from there were locks from what they were able to judge. So they shot those out with the slugs really quick, and then they went to bash in the door. And the problem was it wouldn't budge. And there was another piece that was reinforcing it I didn't ask about, and we didn't know to ask about, and it stopped him from getting in. That gave his brother and his dad time to get to their weapons and start engaging the assault team. And one of our guys got hit. He got hit with the chest plate, thankfully. Unfortunately, the other guy got his arm shot off. And then a big gunfight ensued, and the team pulls back, and they have a bunch of exchange of gunfire. And one thing leads to another, and the commander decides, I'm not losing any more guys. I'm not going to get more guys killed on this. We're just going to level it. We know the targets are in there. They're dead. They can't build any more IEDs. So, a gunship is called in, and they hit it with a Hellfire, and it just flattens the thing. So when they go in there, they're pulling all the bodies out to do, take photos, because they do a PID. And so, they pull all the bodies out and take the photos of everyone. And then I get the photos come back to me the next day, and I got to go in and have my prisoner ID them all. And what really was brutal about having to go back in and do this with the kid was it was bad enough that we killed his dad and his brother. And honestly, they're terrorist dirtbags. They kill a lot of our guys. I really don't care that they personally died. I felt bad I had to tell the kid that they died, because I really did want to interrogate this guy, because I want to know where he's getting all his materials from. But the hard part was, in the process of that, we killed his grandma, we killed his mom, we killed, all of his brothers and all his little brothers and sisters too. In the process, it wasn't just his dad. We wiped his whole family out, and that really sucked, because you have to go in and you have the PID. I mean, this kid sees him; he's just bawling his eyes out, in there. And I'm just like, All right, we got confirmation. So obviously his family, I'm not going to ask him about the rest of it. I don't want to, IDs and his little brothers and sisters and everything else because they're all, mangled up. And that was brutal. That was hard. And it sucked because, looking back on it, I realized the enemy is always going to have a vote in the situation. And at the end of the day, the enemy chose to fight, and that's why they're dead. But for the longest time, I had a hard time accepting that maybe if I had asked a better question, or if I'd remembered to ask this, or if I had done this, it would have turned out differently, and all those people wouldn't have died. I didn't care about the dad and the brother. I felt horrible about the kids and his mom and his parents and his little brother and sisters getting killed. There's like 7 of them. I felt really bad about that. And you start having that regret and start that internal questioning of, did I do this right? Could I have gotten more? And you think about that with all the people that get killed, all the soldiers, all the U.S. soldiers that got killed and got wounded. You start thinking back, what could I have done differently that could have resulted in maybe these guys not getting killed, maybe these guys not getting injured, not getting an arm shot off, not getting paralyzed, or these civilians here not getting killed on this particular raid. One of the last days I was in Iraq, I was interrogating one particular guy, and he was from a little city out in Al-Anbar province. I just randomly got asked to interrogate this guy. He's way outside my normal AOR, and it's right on the Syrian border. And he got injured in an IED that he was himself setting. And so I asked him about, why are you doing this? And he said, well, I'm doing this because if I don't do this, they're going to kill my family. And that was a very, very common thing. Or they're doing it because they didn't have a job and they paid. And so I said, well, okay, this is terrible that they're doing this to your family, but you have a choice. You opted to go ahead and do this, and there's nothing we can do to undo that. But what you can do is you can tell me who are the people who forced you into this situation, because obviously you don't have allegiance to these guys, right? So who forced you into do this? Tell me who they are, show me where they are, and let me sick the Marines on them and go take these bastards out, because no one else should have to go through what you did.
Yeah.
And he that won him over. He sung like a canary. He gave us a good
argument.
Yeah, it was a great argument. And he gave us locations of everyone that he could think of that he knew of that was in there. And I think I had like 7 or 8 days left in Iraq when I talked to that guy, and the Marines actioned it over the course of a couple of days, and they nabbed everyone except one guy. We missed the actual ID builder. They tried several times, and they missed them each time, and that kind of sucked. But I felt good that we got the rest of the cell out of that region was gone, because this is a small area, a small string of villages along the river. I think it's the Euphrates that goes through from Syria into Iraq. And they were really genius bringing the explosives across. What they do is they have these fishing trawlers. They put all the explosives, wrap them in these airtight or watertight bags, and between weapons and explosives and RPGs and mortars and whatever that they're using. And they put them in 55-gallon drums, put a bunch of holes in them, sink them in the water, put them, and then tie a trolley line to the fishing boat. And they go like 2 and 3 miles an hour down the river, and they pull it. And because they're pulling it at such a low speed, it doesn't create enough of a wake that would rise and you'd see it. And for the life of the Marines, they could not figure out how all these damn weapons and explosives were getting into this village in this area, because they're being distributed out to the rest of the province then. And when we told them this is how it's being done, they're like, oh, wow. So they started hitting rivers with some boats doing that. And man, did they find a whole bunch of those things coming in that way. And it kind of nipped that whole area, which is great. And I felt good about that. I felt, wow, we really made a huge impact. And it was great, because like one of the last real interrogations I did that we had a huge impact on, positive impact. And then when I got home, of all places, I was interviewing with the agency later on, maybe like 5 months after I got back, because I was getting out of the Air Force shortly afterwards. So while I was in the I was on terminal leave, and I was doing interviews with them. And the day before one of my interviews, my best friend from church back in Wisconsin, his brother was in the Marine Reserves, and his brother had already done one tour, and his brother was back over there doing again. And his brother got killed the day before in that same village from an IED, likely built by the same IED builder that escaped a couple times. And so I felt really bad about that, because I was like, damn, if we had somehow managed to nab this guy. If there's something more I could have asked or done, or other possible location could have been at, you know, this, his name was Ricky. He's like, this guy would be alive today, and I knew him for, gosh, I knew him growing up for probably 12 years, and he just gotten married and whatnot. And, this is his second tour. And I just felt terrible about that. It blew my interview with the agency after making all through the process. That process goes, you made it all the way through. And, my head wasn't in at that point. I had a hard time accepting that. And that was really challenging. The longer my time in doing that job went from me doing it onward, it just started to unravel and become much harder to accept and deal with, probably 3-4 years after the fact. That's when it really, really became bad.
Yeah. So actually you said something earlier that made me think that you may have jumped ahead to when you went through and had to deal with a lot of this years later. Cause you said, I realized that the enemy had a vote, because you're saying a lot of the what ifs, which I've definitely been there myself. And I've spoken to so many people who are like, if I had only done this, this wouldn't have happened and this person would still be alive. But then you kind of have this like clarity or rational thought of, well, the enemy has a vote. Like they may have just decided to fight, even if that door had gone in a different direction, like opened a different direction or the locks were in a different place. You still could have had the same outcome. How did you end up overcoming some of those demons and difficulties that you ended up dealing with?
So for a long time, I did not overcome those demons and details. I really, really struggled with this a lot. When I got out of, so you're doing this job, you're almost like Jack Bauer in a way of that, I'm finding targets, and it's either going to a line unit to action, an ODA team to action, or a JSOC team to go action. Depend on the type of target, who's on deck, and what the mission is, depends which set it's going to go to, tier 1, 2, or 3. And it's always going to be one of these things. And it's high octane adrenaline pumping job. I'm not a shooter, but I'm the dude who's pointing the shooter where to go. And then he's bringing Mohammed so-and-so back for me to interrogate and get information on. And I get the guy for the next person above him, and they're back out actually hitting that one. And they're bringing that guy back to me. And we keep working up the chain. And you're doing this high impact job where you see real results that are actually affecting the outcome of the war, really changing things that are happening in the country for the good. And then you come home and you're Joe Nobody. My last day in Iraq, me and a couple other interrogators had to wait for the next bird in the morning while most of the team went back to Kuwait. So I'm sitting there. It's last night of Ramadan. We're getting absolute, crap pounded out of us, just hammering us for like 20, 30 minutes of just, mortars and rockets hitting our base. I think it was like 30, 40, booms I counted or something. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, this is unfreaking believable. I'm getting out of this damn place in like 5 to 7 hours, and they're bombing the hell out of this thing. And I don't want to die. I've been here this whole time and through all this hell. I just want to get out of here. And then 4 days later, I'm walking around the Brandon Mall here in Tampa after living through that. 10 days earlier, we just actioned this operation in this small town, nailing all these Al-Qaeda guys and cleaning up this village. And now I'm walking around the Brandon Mall, seeing all these people on these new phones called a smartphone, an iPhone I'd never seen or heard of. And they're getting their Starbucks Frappuccinos and their little whatevers, walking around the mall like it's hunky-dory, nothing's going on. And I just been in this incredible world. And now I'm here. It's like walking on a different planet. That was really hard to adjust and go back to when you're going from 80, 90 hours a week to 40 hours of just dull monotony. And so I got out of the Air Force. I was going to transition to the agency, doing basically the exact same job. And then after 6 months of interviewing, whatever, I didn't get selected, probably because I blew the interview because my friend got killed. And then I went back to Iraq as a contractor. So I put all that off. Those feelings got suppressed. I went back into game mode. I was back as a contractor. I worked that for one DoD contract for a little while. I swapped over. I was going to go on with Blackwater, I got hired in with them. And then before I could start training under that contract with them, it all got flipped over to Triple Canopy. The whips is the whips contract. So then I went and did my training with Triple Canopy and deployed back, on that doing that stuff with them at the embassy. And then I finally got a job at CENTCOM. I was sitting there, and it was 2010. It was in March. We had this huge car bomb go off and just blew the whole face of a building off. Like a 500-600 pound car bomb blew the face of this building off a hotel a few miles, like a mile or so from the man camp. Knocked me on my butt. Everyone else is like, holy crap, and I was like, dude, I gotta get out of this place. I gotta get out of here. So that's why I started like aggressively looking for a job back home. I just wanted out. Making $575 a day and working for Triple Canopy. I was like, I don't care. I want out. And then a couple days later, our camp got surrounded by Iraqi cops from the Ministry of Interior because they had a list of all the Blackwater employees, and they're not technically allowed to be in country. They're barred. But all they did was change contracts. So different contract name. We're still there. And we're State Department. We're not DOD. And they surround the compound like, well, we're coming in, and everyone's like, hey, everyone, man your stations. They're coming in. And we're like, great. So we're all like ready to repel this assault on the man camp. We got 500 mercenaries. We're like, yeah, you ain't getting in. And the Army, the U.S. Army had to go over there and intervene and get between us because the RSOs are trying to tell the Ministry of Interior, you can't do this. They work for us, or our security, blah blah blah. It was a big problem. I'm like, dude, I gotta get out of this place. I do not want to. I'm done. I can't take the stress. I can't take this anymore. And that's when I went to work at CENTCOM, and then got a job in Europe. And I think in Europe is when I started to really experience a lot more of the PTSD, because things started to just slow down. I was still doing terrorist hunting, but in a different respect. It was a lot more buying with partner nations in the Balkans and the Caucasus regions, doing a lot of different overt stuff instead of covert stuff. But that's when the PTSD started to really hit me, because I'm living in Europe. It's more relaxed life. You just have time to think. Everything calms down. And I just wasn't processing, your anger. I wasn't processing, how to deal with this, accept it, indecisiveness, and over the course of several years, it just led to me, losing different jobs, and just kind of leaving you wondering, what do I do next? How do I do this? And I think so I was talking with the VA in 2015 in DC, when I was at DC at the time. And someone there had encouraged me to look into writing as writing therapy and do that. So I said, you know what? I like to read. I'm an avid reader, but the type and kind of books I like to read there just weren't any new ones being created. So I decided I would start creating my own books like that.
And what were they, James?
What is
that type?
Yeah, the first book I wrote was called Prelude to World War III. It's kind of a post-apoc, what might happen down the road or whatever. And ironically, the first book I wrote was this one, Interview with a Terrorist. At the time, we published it in 2009 or early 2010 with another publisher. They did nothing for us though, and so it didn't really go anywhere. At the time, it was titled Dinner with a Terrorist, and that was largely because about 2/3 of my interrogations were typically over dinner, over a meal. The very traditional thing in Arab culture, when we're eating together, we can't be enemies. And so we would sit and we would have dinner and just talk about family and life and what they'd wanted to do before the war and what they planned to do after it. And then we would smoke the hookah pipe, and then I would work in my interrogation routine, what I wanted. And so I pulled a lot of my things through conversation, doing that. It was a much more effective way than, the asshole interrogator approach everyone thinks of. So I had some experience with writing books, and I started writing it. And then, but my PTSD was just really bad. I lost a job in 2014. My security clearance lapsed a number of months after that. So then I was out of DoD world entirely. I couldn't get back in. It was the only thing I'd ever known. We were obviously in the recession. There was no jobs. It was very hard to find something. I was just really struggling. And I remember when I decided, you know what, I'm done. I think this is it. I think I'm just gonna, just punch my ticket, just be done. And my daughter was, a couple of years old at that time, and I remember hearing, people who were, terminal, talking about how they just wanted to have one good last day with their family before they kind of were kind of dead and done. And so I was thinking that. I was like, I'm going to make Halloween, it was Halloween 2015. I'm like, I'm going to make Halloween the best day. So we met up with friends. We were going trick-or-treating with the kids. We were doing all this. And, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I'll wait for everyone to go to sleep. I'll just take I'll take all my sleeping pills or whatever, and just go in my sleep, be nice and peaceful. And that was kind of what I was thinking. That was what was going through my mind. I don't know if I was legitimately going to act on it, but that's what was in my headspace. That's what I was thinking the whole day. And I figure we get home and I'm thinking, well, I'll just wait, wait for everyone to fall asleep, because that's still how it's running through my head, the plan or whatever. And I ended up falling asleep and myself. And when I woke up, I was thinking, today's a new day. And I feel different. I feel better than I did yesterday. I don't feel quite the same way. I'm still uber depressed, but I don't feel that. I don't feel like I did yesterday. And that's when I started to get, some more help from the VA and started getting some different medications to kind of help with that a little bit. And then I said, you know what? I got to make this writing thing work. If I put all my effort and energy into this writing, then these thoughts, these emotions, they can't encroach on that. I can work them into the grave. I can work those emotions back, those bad thoughts back down to their recesses, and just focus on this. And that's when the writing stuff really took off and took over. And I just really poured everything into it.
Can I ask you a tough question, James?
Yeah.
Because I've been in that situation you described, and it's a pretty scary place to be. Did you write a note or anything to kids?
No,
no,
nothing. No, I didn't tell anyone. Never told anyone. Probably never told anyone for years.
Yeah.
Just because I didn't know definitively that I was going to actually act on it. I was thinking long and hard about it, but I don't think I had determined in my mind, this is what I'm going to do. I kind of like planned along like it was going that way, but I didn't actually plan the execution. But it caused me to realize that, when you're feeling like that, sometimes the best thing to do is just to take a nap or go to sleep, go to bed, and just wake up and have a new day, a new mindset, let it reset. But then you have to start seeking some help and doing something else, because it's going to come back. So for me, I became a workaholic with the writing and doing that and putting my effort into that. And the books started coming out, and we didn't make a whole lot of money, but they were making little. And then I got another job that took us to Chicago, working in cybersecurity. And I enjoyed doing that, doing the security assessments and that kind of work. But I got let go again. They did a massive, they sold part of the company to BlackRock. And when a large Fortune 500 company does that, that's usually when they do a massive downsizing of people, is to roll it all in the expenses of that. And I come in as a VP with Aon Insurance, and I was last in, so obviously I'm in the first out. So I was there a year and I got let go. I was pretty devastated about that, because I'm thinking, man, it's my third freaking job this has happened to. So I started talking more with the VA, getting some better medications with them, and then just decided, if I can work 60 hours a week for a company, I can write books 60 hours a week and just expand this, because we had seen some decent success. We had made over 30 grand our first year writing 3 books. We made some pretty good money at this. I was like, damn, this is actually not bad as a path here.
Did you enjoy the process of writing them, James? Like, was it a monumental lift to put them out, but you enjoyed it?
It was super easy. Once I got into like a scene, like when you got into a scene, you start creating, it just started to flow. I was like, okay, I got this sequence and I'm writing this battle sequence, or I'm writing this story, and it just flowed. It was so easy. And next thing you know, you've got 5,000 words on the paper, or 6,000 words on the paper in a day. And, you wake up the next day and you start right back into it. And lo and behold, you've written like, 20,000 words in like 10 days. And, you keep doing that. What we didn't know, or we struggled with, was, the whole business aspect of writing. Okay. Like, how do you create a book description that isn't a synopsis? Or a diary of the mouth of what the book is, because then they have no reason to read the book. how to do professional covers and what they should really look like and how they should convey information, how you do, the editing piece. We were poor and we didn't have a lot of money. So it was, you cut corners on things, and then you start realizing that as you start to make money, when you start to make $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month, you need to start investing in legitimate editing and making these things professional and better quality, because you're not going to continue to do well if you don't do that in subsequent series. So we started to professionalize the writing because we decided in 2017, when I had gotten laid off, to really go into writing full time and just make it work. And that, our first series that really took off, was this particular book, Battlefield Ukraine. It was a 6-book series that we were going to write about an unholy alliance between China and Russia, and how they would plan to supplant the West and the United States, economically and militarily. And it starts in Ukraine, and it spirals to Korea and Taiwan and the Pacific, and then circles back to Russia and China when we eventually unite the world in combined force and defeat them. And that series took off. I mean, it just took off. We were having months where we were hitting like 7,000, then we had months where we were hitting 10,000, then we had a month where we hit like in the 20s, and we were like, holy crap, this is insane.
Book sales. Is that book sales?
Yeah, in like a single month. And we were like, oh my God, this is insane, how this is just going. And we were like, this is it. This is it. We found our calling. We found what works for us, what we can do. And so we started, really kind of moving forward with that. And writing full-time also gave me the time to really kind of work with the VA and some other counseling stuff to really walk through the PTSD. And I went to one of these a couple day retreat, PTSD retreat through this other Christian organization. And one of the guys there, he was in the Royal Marines, and he was relaying some experiences he had in Northern Ireland, the Troubles and whatnot, and how he had one of his buddies had gotten killed in front of him, and how it hurt him when he would see these kids laughing and jumping in the puddle of his buddy's blood. And all that just really hurt him. And he was the one who says, at the end of the day, the enemy gets to vote. They get to decide if they're going to fight back or not fight back. And all you can do is, your best. And at the end of the day, if they fight, then what happens after that decision's been made is not your fault. It's their fault. And realizing that helped a lot, because then it took a lot of the self-guilt that you feel that, I could have done more, because you couldn't have done more. There's nothing more you could have done, because they made the decision to fight. You can't make that decision for them. That was theirs to make, and they chose it. And as a consequence, X, Y, and Z happened. And that's very hard to accept, but you have to accept it. And once you do, you're never going to, PTSD is never going to get healed. It's never going to go away, but you learn to live with it. You learn to accept it, and it becomes much more manageable. And that's the hardest thing to accept and deal with.
You had mentioned, as we were kicking this off just before we started recording, that you tried some different treatments. And I think you mentioned something down the psychedelic route. Could you talk a little bit about that if you're comfortable with it?
Yeah. So the first thing I did is I heard a 60-minute episode from Dakota Myers, and he was talking about that stellate ganglion block injection. And he did a 60-minute episode specifically about that. And so I watched that. I said, wow, this is really interesting. I think I'd like to try this. So I started looking up who in my local area did that. And I found a doctor in Tampa. She was a pain management doctor. She also had worked in the VA before. And she mentioned she had on her website a single paragraph that talked about this treatment. And it was all she had on her website. And I called him about it. And she said that she'd only done this for one other person. And I said, well, I want to do it next. And so, I did that. And we went through a couple of treatments, because it doesn't always work with one time. Sometimes it's basically as a nerve in the neck, and there's one on both sides. So sometimes you have to hit them both, and they do them one at a time. And sometimes you may need to hit the nerve twice. And what that particular nerve does is it interrupts the body's fight or flight signal when you have a PTSD trigger. So when the mind has the trigger hits, it sends a biological response to the body, and it travels down that nerve. And then that's when you dump your adrenaline, your heart races, you start, all the other physical problems take over. The block stops that. It interrupts it, and it prevents it from happening. So it kind of like a short circuit. It hits it and it bounces back to the brain and reset. So it doesn't take it away, but it does interrupt it from occurring. And so that worked for a while. Then I had a friend of mine who did the psychedelics, and I heard about that. And so I looked into that, and I found someone, again, another pain management doctor here in Tampa, who does ketamine therapy for PTSD. And so I did some research on this. This is something that's been around for 30, 40 years to treat depression and anxiety. And apparently Walter Reed's been testing this for a number of years for treatment with PTSD. And so I tried it. And after the first treatment, it was just incredible, the difference you feel. So like Dakota Myers was saying, when you have the SGB injection, it's almost like being in a busy intersection and suddenly you're in a forest. It's quiet. You don't have that feeling of that heart racing palpitation, that anxiety that comes when you're being triggered. And that's very true. But what the ketamine does is the ketamine is like a reset for the brain. It works on reconnecting a lot of the neuroreceptors, and it's a reset. It's a mental reset. So when you do that treatment, and what my doctor does is he does a total of 6 treatments. So it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The treatment will literally last, you're only under for maybe about 20 to 30 minutes. And then about another 20 to 30 minutes for it to wear off before whoever's driving with you can take you back home. And, you largely feel mostly normal fairly quickly after that. But mentally, wow, like you go to bed for that night, it's going to be the best night of your sleep you'll have had in decades. And it just changes the mind. It just changes your whole, everything about it is just completely different. But it's a different experience. You're going down the rabbit hole. I mean, like they say, it's Alice in Wonderland. You're chasing down the rabbit hole to see how far it goes. When Morpheus is handing you the blue pill and the red pill and says, how far do you want to go? And no joke, man, you're going to go down there, and it is an alternate reality. It is it is kind of disassociative, in a way, because I don't want to say you're like hallucinating, but it's almost like an out of body experience. So what he does to help mitigate, a bad trip, because that can happen too, is he gives you like a benzodiazepine before it, which is, makes you euphoric, happy. So when he gives it to you, you're in that state when you go down the rabbit hole. But it's the strangest thing. I was only under for probably 20 minutes, between 20 and 30 minutes. And I swear it felt like it was probably years or a decade when I woke up. So that's what it feels like. I tell everyone it's like a cross between the Matrix when it comes to different realities like that. And then it's like Inception when it comes to like you fall into a dream. And while you're in this rabbit hole in this dream, you're going to fall into another dream. And then you're going to fall into another dream. It's like different layers that you're going down. And time just, warp sense of time is just unbelievable craziness. And you wake up and it's just like, wow, and it's a new person. I wish the VA offered these things and did these things, because this is far better than going down the pharmaceutical route. And while talk therapy, CPT, cognitive processing therapy, and some of the other ones are good, you can't do those, or you shouldn't do those, without doing SGB first and ketamine second, because both of those are going to give your mindset the ability, the freedom and the ability to actually process and talk about that without triggering the crap out of you and going nuts. That's why 70% of people don't complete CPT training, that therapy. Mm-hmm. They can't get through it. It's too hard. If you at least do SGB, you're going to at least block the body's trigger while you go through it. But the ketamine will at least help the mind reset so it can walk through it without freaking out, without going, crazy.
Yeah.
I wish they would do more of these psychedelic trains and stuff like that, and do that and help with that. like I say, writing therapy has been great for us because it's given us a job, an alternate path that we can pursue. And I probably wouldn't have been able to do those alternate treatments if I hadn't done the writing path. I wouldn't have been in contact with some people who turned me on to it. And I have to self-fund all of this too.
Yeah.
These aren't
Yeah.
VA covered things, and these were expensive treatments. And so I had to pay these things out of pocket, but I had the money to do it because the writing's been good enough to pay for it.
And you've mentioned that you are working with other vets on writing, right? Like, where did that come from for you?
Yeah, so I have one of my veterans. He writes under the name Matt Jackson, and so he's 74 now. When he reached out to me, he was 70. He was one of my beta readers. He was helping me with crafting some airborne scenes I was writing for one of my books. And he's a retired '06. He was a battalion commander in 101st Airborne in Desert Storm. He was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. So he was a warrant officer first before he went enlisted. He got battlefield commission to be a lieutenant. And so he flew helicopters over in Vietnam. He spent 3 years doing that. Saw a lot of action doing that stuff. And then, became an officer and went the airborne route and did that. And, when he got out, he was fine. But when he officially retired, that's when his PTSD, he retired here from Tennessee to Florida. That's when his PTSD started to hammer him. So he was in his mid to upper 60s when it started to really hit him hard and affect him negatively. And he started helping me with these scenes, and he was finding it was really neat. And so he started asking me about the writing. And I said, well, I started writing my memoir, my own experiences in Iraq as an interrogator. And so I encouraged him to do that. So he started writing his own book about his experience as a helicopter pilot. His first book's Undaunted Valor. And he wrote that. And when I moved down here to Florida from Chicago, we met up for lunch and we were able to talk more about it. I helped him with his book. I linked him up with my editor, linked him up with my cover designer. We helped him with his book description, marketing, all that stuff. And we got his first book published and going. And then, so many people that he knew from Vietnam were reading the book and liking it. And all these other vets were saying, oh, what about this battle? What about that battle? Or what about this unit during the exact same time you were there? And next thing you know, he's getting all this inundated new information. He's like, well, why don't I write about this? So then he started writing about this other battle. And then he's like, well, we all, in 1971, we all participated in this Lam Sam 79, which is one of the largest aerial, battles in helicopter aviation history. We had like hundreds and hundreds of helicopters that got shot down in this thing. It was like a huge battle I hadn't even heard of. And he wrote a whole book about that thing. And, he's writing several more after that. And it was cool and unique because here's a guy who's 70, gets into writing. His wife says it's a complete radical change in him. He's now not an angry, cantankerous old man. He actually enjoys what he's doing. It's helping him immensely. He's connecting with all kinds of buddies he hasn't heard from in 40, 50 years who are sharing all his experiences, and lo and behold, he's making real good money. I mean, I don't know how he's made more money at it with the few books he has than I did. He's been hitting, $4,000 and $5,000 a month on just a couple of books and doing great and just continues doing it. He's continuing on with it. He's got plenty more. And, I brought up, well, why don't we write this alternate Desert Storm series? What if Saddam hadn't stopped in Kuwait, just kept going? He's like, oh, that'd be great. So, we collaborated on that book series for 9 months and wrote 3 books that talked about that. And he had all these generals and colonels and people he knew from Desert Storm reaching out to him. And, we had a couple 3-star generals, give us feedback and input on this plan, how this worked and how that worked and why they didn't do this, why they did that. And we made it really, really good.
That's really cool.
Like factual fictional book of that thing of how it turned out together. But I decided, why don't I see if other veterans would be interested in this too? And so inside my network, I mentioned I was open to taking on a few people. And if you submit some ideas, submit your proposal. So if you guys gave me some, reached out, talked to me, they'd already been beta readers helping me. And I gave them writing assignments. Said, okay, well, here's what I want you to do. I want you to write this because I want to see what your skill level is and how much work it's going to take on my end. I found 3 guys I thought that I could help and work with, and been taking them on. And this is the year. So last year was a lot of mentoring and teaching them and having them co-write with me. write scenes, work with them, teach them X, Y, and Z and how it happens. This year, though, is the year that they're going to start actually writing their own books and releasing their own books. And that stuff's going to start coming out this year. And my goal is, after their first series with me, shepherding and co-authoring and helping them with it, is to transition them to their second series, where they'll be positioned to go 100% solely on their own if they choose to, and be able to be off to the races running on their own with everything I've taught them and learned from. Because part of the problem in our veteran community is, one, we don't support each other enough. We don't buy from each other enough. We should buy our own products and support our own community, kind of like how Black Rifle's done with their stuff and Grunt Style's done with their stuff. We should have more stories like that in Nine Live. We need to have stories like that. And the problem, again, our issue is we aren't providing veterans that are struggling with PTSD a new mission and purpose beyond the military. And this is why they're struggling. This is why they're killing themselves, because they have no mission, no purpose. So I like to say we have to find ways to repurpose them with something new. So take your life experiences you have, which are immense, and in my case, channel it into writing, whether it's writing science fiction, whether it's writing mysteries, whether it's writing thrillers and in military books, whatever. Use your experiences for something constructive, put it into writing, and now you can support yourself. You can start making money with this, and you don't have to work a traditional 9-to-5 job where it's just a pain to deal with your PTSD in those jobs and not getting fired, or not busting out and having verbal altercations with people and in fights and being, the employee nobody wants to be around and getting fired all the time. Yeah. And this is a job that there is no income cap. I'm not saying it's easy. It's hard as hell, but if you find the right mentor that can teach you and show you the ropes, there is no limit to what you can make. I have friends of mine who make, $100,000 a month, $300,000 a month writing books, because your books aren't just sold on your local store. On Amazon, when you're exclusive with Amazon, your books are being sold all around the world. So there are many days I'll wake up and I'll check my KDP, publishing account, and I'll see I've already made $700 worth of sales, and it's 9 a.m. And that's from Europe. That's from Europe and Asia.
Yeah.
And I still have the whole US market to tackle. So, it's one of those unique job opportunities that almost anyone can get into. There's no real barrier to entry. It is hard, but veterans are used to working hard. And if you're willing, if you went through Ranger School, any of these other schools, or anything tough, deployed to Iraq, you already got some toughness built into you. You know how to work hard. And if you put that level of tenacity and effort into learning this craft, the world's your oyster. I mean, you can succeed wildly and do that. And you don't have to work 9-to-5. Bad PTSD, whatever, don't work that day. Go for a run, go to the gym, just veg out and watch TV, and then write when you feel like you can.
What, I'll get you out of here in just a second. I got 2 questions I ask everybody.
No worries.
But I also wanted to ask, James, are you working on something now, or is there a book in particular that you're promoting at this time?
Yeah, so I have, So one, I like to read military science fiction. I don't write that. I like to read that. I write military thrillers and espionage thrillers. I decided, well, why don't I just take a crack at writing these, military sci-fi? So I started writing a series, and lo and behold, basically what it is, I created a military thriller in space. It's just fast forward 100 years. Same writing style. All our books are plot driven. They're not character driven. That's very different from a lot of writers. And that series just took off rip roaring, and it's just been killing it. We only have 5 books out right now, but all 5 are in the top 50, top 75 in their genres, and have been there since they were released, which is insane, because I'm not known as a sci-fi writer. I'm really known as a thriller writer. And so our main series, I go back and forth. So I write 2 books in sci-fi and 2 books in thriller, and I go back and forth. But the main one we're doing right now is this particular series, Monroe Doctrine. It's going to be 7 volumes, 7 books total when it ends, but this is the main one. We just released book 4 almost 3.5 weeks ago. It's racked up almost over 700 reviews in 3 weeks. We've got the next one coming out in about 2 months, and then it's going to be a little bit wait for the last 2 to finish the series. But what I love about being able to tell that story, and that's a plot-driven story, we're really looking at the evolution of artificial intelligence and autonomous warfare. So this is the wave of the future. AI is going to be leading, battle plans and strategies, and being able to do something we call predictive behavioral analysis, where when you've been able to teach an AI how society responds and acts given certain circumstances, and then you can distill that down to individual people and teach how they do that. You can build a profile around military commanders that can very accurately depict how they will respond to in certain situations. So say you're the Chinese in the South China Sea, right? And you're trying to test how far you can push the American Navy. And Commander so-and-so is in command of this ship. They're passing through right now. From his social profile that you've built on him, he's going to respond to this, to X, Y, and Z up to this point. And then they're likely to deviate and go away. Now, prior to knowing that, you wouldn't know how far you could push before it would be too far. But now you do, you can push that envelope all the way up to the edge. And the Americans in response are going, holy crap, they're really pushing far. We didn't think they would go that. They went farther than we thought they would. And we're kind of having to react to that. We don't know why. But every time we react, we're setting a new baseline for the AI to factor in for the next encounter and the next encounter. And you build on that. And eventually you can get to a point where you're going to start being able to predict how they're going to respond in military actions and situations. And when you're able to build that kind of a profile off the entire DoD apparatus, it becomes a very powerful tool when you're fighting US forces. And you do the same thing for politicians. And then you throw in the economic aspects, you throw in deep fakes and leverage deep fakes to whip up different tribes and audience segments on social media inside the US, and you stir up different bases and different organizations. Maybe you have a deep fake where you have, a handful of cops beating the hell out of a black man, and it's totally fake. But that fake video gets pumped into the right social media feeds and networks, and next thing you know, it's stirring up all kinds of stuff. And then you have, on the converse, you have another one where you have a horrific thing happening with an illegal immigrant. There's a video of an immigrant raping a young child and something horrible, right? And it's caught on tape and it's fed into the right channels. And again, it stirs up massive outrage. And you're creating all these actions inside a country that are destabilizing it politically and economically that are fake. And it's all leading up to a preemptive attack to weaken your adversary before you actually engage them. So the book is just chock full of how they're moving forward with that goal in the future, and then how we have to figure out how we're going to respond to this and why are they doing it. We focus on the Monroe Doctrine because we focus how everything's taking place in the Caribbean and how they're using the Belt and Road Initiative to get their tentacles into Cuba, El Salvador, Venezuela and Guyana and those other areas down there. And that's kind of the launch pad to directly challenge us. And while we're focused on that, bogged down in that, they're able to run wild with Taiwan and the Russian Far East. And it's just an incredible, landscape of how we think the future will play out and how autonomous warfare and cyber warfare will happen. Especially when you use like drone vehicles, drone aircraft, drone catamarans for the surface contacts. It's the wave of the future. It's the techno stuff. It's how it's going to happen. It's a great series. We've got 2,100 reviews on the first book. And it's just crushing it right now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is great. Stuff. I got 2 questions I like to ask everybody, and we'll have a way for everybody to find this. So, find all of your books. So I ask everybody, and I don't know how it will play out for the interrogator in you, but was there anything that you took in to these interrogations that had like sentimental good luck value to you?
Oh, all right. So, all right. I remember I've heard some of your questions about that. The pilot's taking you, wife's underwear in with them, and all these other little things that kind of funny, kind of ironic. All right. So in my case, I didn't take anything in with me specifically. I did do something on my way to every interrogation. And I know people would find this corny and interesting, whatever. For me, I was in the valley of the shadow of death. And so for me, it helped me because I wasn't a shooter, but you just can't imagine the psychological crap we had to live in to do this kind of job, and where we had to hear and see and do on a daily basis with us, direct with the enemy every freaking day. I don't get to kill him like you guys did. So for me, I was Christian, so I would always pray before I go into the booth. I'd say, all right, God, I don't know how I'm going to get any information out of this dirt bag. I don't know what you want me to get out of this thing, but whatever it is, help me find something that's going to move us one step closer to ending this conflict, or one step closer to bring this thing to an end, whatever that may be. And that's what I would do. And somehow or another, I mean, I wasn't the interrogator, I wasn't the asshole interrogator who would just, get in people's face. But I was very just, I don't know, soothing, convincing, just, okay, it's not your fault. I get it. Let's talk about whose fault it is, shift the blame, give them an out, allow them to narc on someone else without confessing to their own actions. Because I don't care about their own actions. They're already in custody. I want information to put the dirt bags in custody or in the dirt, and so I give them an out. And that was really effective. And for me, I would do that before every interrogation. And maybe that's why it was effective and worked. I don't know. But 56% of the time I'd walk in the booth, I'm walking out with an interrogation report. I was really freaking good at that stuff. It just worked.
Got it. That's a good one. That's a really good one. And then sure, as you've heard, I ask everybody, and especially with kind of the psychological side that you went through and truly manipulating and having to be in the booth with these people day in and day out for so long, and what that led to for other people outside the wire, would you go back and do that again?
Oh man, that's so hard. So hard. I am where I am today because of what I did and what I volunteered for that shit, believe it or not. I'm here and I'm where I am because I volunteered for that and I did that. I would rather not have the choice to go back to that day I made that decision to volunteer, because if I was given that choice, I probably would say no and not go back to do that. Because you're never emotionally going to be the same. Those prisoners are messed up mentally, but you know what? So are us interrogators who did that job. And I'm never going to be fully normal and the same from all of that. And, I've got, from the burn pit exposure, we were burning lithium ion batteries and cell phones and computers. And I got exposed to, fluoride gas and some other things, and I was 30 years old, 32 years old, and had both my hips replaced, because my bones have fallen apart, and I've got, now I've got, my bones are becoming brittle and breaking on me, and, nerve pain, all kinds of issues like that. And so huge consequences from me volunteering for that and doing that. So it served its purpose. I'm where I am because of it. I'm glad we were able to accomplish a lot of good, but I can't say for certain I would go back and volunteer to do that again, knowing the price that was going to have to be paid for it. I like what I've accomplished since then, but I've really only found any semblance of peace and acceptance in probably the last 2 or 3 years. So it was, it was not a pleasant journey to get to the last year or two, or the last year or two of success with the writing. So I don't know. I mean, it'd be hard. I wouldn't want that choice, because I don't know that I would make the same choice. Probably not the answer most people give. I'm sure most people say they would do it again or whatever, but
Yep.
the sacrifice was just, I don't know. I think it was almost too great,
Yeah. It
Tough.
sounds like, though, a lot of people were glad that you were in that spot, though.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we saved a lot of people. I mean, we legitimately did save a lot of people. We disrupted a domestic attack that, I don't know what would have happened. We were the third source to report on it, which is why it got actioned and broken up when it did. And a lot of people were arrested. And I don't know if that thing would have been broken up without us. Maybe it would have. They did know of it. But, ours was the one that put it over the top. So, a lot of things were prevented, and people, are around because of it. But the sacrifice that was made to do that was immense, absolutely immense. And I feel terrible for my poor wife, who has had to put up with me and deal with that all of this time, because, she married one man, and I went to Iraq, and I've never been the same man since. And she's, she lost that person, that first person that she married, and she's had to learn to accept and deal with the person that's come home. And that's not been easy for her. And I feel bad for her and having to do that. And I'm really cautious with my kids and trying to make sure that I'm not that, that PTSD asshole to them and around them, and overreact with them and do things like that. And because that interrogator switch just comes back on really fast, and you can be so vicious with the tongue. You've been trained and taught to be just really vicious with the tongue and manipulative like you couldn't believe. And it just comes with ease, such ease to do that too. You don't even recognize it, but it's there. And it's hard to keep that in check and to be authentic and real, and not this coercive, manipulative person that's always got an angle. And it's so easy to do, and they don't even know what's happening. I mean, I was in the Air Force. I had to go to the behavioral psychologist and do a psych eval with them when I came back from the tour. She's like, "Did you see any dead people? Did you do any of this?" I'm like, "Yeah, I saw a lot of dead people." "Oh, well, you gotta go talk to this person now." So the first interview, this gal is talking about different things, and within 15, 20 minutes of the interview of her talking to me, I have her telling me, because she's a contractor, I manipulated her into telling me, why she was doing this, what she thinks of the Air Force Command, how it's helping, what does she like, what she not like, all these different things. We talked for like an hour, and almost none of it was about me. And it was just so easy to flip the script on her. And the next time we talked, she realized what had happened. She's like, "You can't do that.
She called you on it, huh?"
Yeah, she's like, "You're not here to interrogate me.
Wow.
I'm here to talk to you about what happened and what's going on, and what's going on in your head." And I had to put that in. I had to check that. But that was very hard. It was very hard for me to do that throughout my working career afterwards with people I'm working with superiors, subordinates, the whole kit and caboodle, because you know how to get what you want. You can manipulate people into it, and it's not right. It's not ethical. It's not right to do that. But something you got to learn to deal with.
No, that's. I'm glad you did that. You mentioned that, because I had that as a question that I decided not to ask. How you handle that skill now. So thanks for sharing that.
It's tough. It's a fight, man, to deal with that. Now I just put it into the books. It makes for really clever stories and plots and questions and dialogues and scenarios. Be like, "Oh my God, I didn't even think of that." But I like to make them as absolutely raw, real, and emotional as humanly possible, with really good details in them. So when I write a tank scene, I have tankers who help me with the language. If I do aircraft, I have fighter pilots that help me with the language. Same with the naval ships and special forces guys. So the details are there. The only thing I don't do, which is unique, we don't use any profanity in our books. No profanity or sexual content. And if you're really good with your use of the English language, you don't need it. You can visually describe what's happening without using an F-bomb every other word, like some writers like to use. I got a graduate degree from Oxford. I went to a really good school, and they teach you how to write really, really good without using that kind of stuff. So, it's a known branded thing, and it makes the books readable to a younger audience.
Yeah, that's great.
The violence is still there, obviously. The violence and tech is still there, but we just don't use F-bombs every other word. There's no reason for it.
Well,
crazy.
Thanks so much, James, for the time. I'll let you get out of here. This has been super fun. I could ask you questions about these books all day long. And
feel free. If you guys want to come back and talk scenarios for any particular book, you let me know, because man, awesome. We have some really just slick things that are going on. And again, I worked at U.S. European Command. I was there when Admiral Stavridis was there, and the last part of early part of General Breedlove's time when he was there. And we used to sit in on these high-end meetings with the deputy commander and the SOCIR commander, and the different agency groups, and we would talk. They talk about the AOR threats and strategies and what's going on, what are the plans, and what are we doing, how are we countering this and that. And you do that for years, man. You come away with an awful lot of information and just insight in how things work. So when you're crafting,
they actually work.
They actually work. Like, this is how it actually works, but it goes on. It's not. Nothing's like classified intel or anything. But it's just explaining that this is what it works. You don't just magically deploy a division to Europe. It doesn't happen overnight. That takes like weeks and months to actually make happen. So things like that, but it's fun. But yeah, let me know. You want to talk about any of those? We'll gladly dive into that kind of stuff. Or talk about how you set up a writing business and actually make money in this thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would love to dig in there. So I'll be interested. I'll have to get the names for some of the other vets that you're mentoring, just so people can get their hands on those books too. It's such a great opportunity for them. So thanks for doing that, and thanks for spending all this time with us, James. This has been a lot of fun.
If it helps any other vets figure out and learn that there's the other tools for the SGB or the ketamine therapy or anything else like that, and it changes one life, one family, one community, it is worth it. And that's how you make a difference in general.
100%. We'll go out on that. Our first comment comes from Ryan Williams on the Shrek interview on YouTube. He says, "Love the show. It's what I listen to every day at work to keep me motivated. The inside look into the soldier's mindset is incredibly fascinating and makes me want to do better in my everyday life. Please keep them coming. It's improving my daily life." Well, thanks for saying that, Ryan. I'm glad you get an opportunity to take a break during the day and listen to this and some of these amazing stories. I find the same value in them, so thanks for taking the time to share that. Our second comment is also from YouTube, and it's a question that came from the Coastal Cardition on the Travis Hall interview. And he said, "I didn't hear of Travis being a handler and an 18 Delta. Did he have any veterinarian training?" And Travis was kind enough to respond in the comments. So for those who had the same question, because I think several did, he said, "We dabbled in dogs, and I definitely had canine trauma training, but nowhere near the level of a veterinarian." And it's funny because in the Carl Erickson episode, which we released after Travis, in fact, Travis introduced me to Carl, we talk a little bit more about Travis and his work with the dogs. And one of the things we chatted about was the fact that there's a new movie coming out with Channing Tatum, which almost sounds like Travis Hall's story about him and his dog. If you listen to the podcast, you'll know it well, and I think you'll start seeing some of the trailers for this movie coming out. And we were joking that Travis should probably get some royalties from that. Anyway, thank you for leaving the question, and love the fact that Travis and some of our guests get in there in the comments and answer these questions y'all have. So thank you, and stay safe.